but you are free. Persuasion technique. Have you ever wondered why some people can ask for something and almost always hear yes, while others are met with hesitation or a flat-out no? Why do some requests slide effortlessly into the hearts of strangers, while others feel pushy, uncomfortable, and doomed from the start? The answer may not lie in what they ask, but how they ask it. Among the many psychological tools hidden in plain sight, one of the most powerful is also the most paradoxical. It's called the "but you are free" technique, also known as the evoking freedom technique, and it works not by applying pressure, but by releasing it. In essence, it involves adding a simple phrase to a request, something like, "but you are free to say no," or "only if you feel like it." This quiet acknowledgement of autonomy does something curious to the human mind. Instead of weakening the request, it strengthens it. It doesn't repel consent, it attracts it. This might sound counterintuitive. After all, wouldn't telling someone they can say no give them more reason to refuse? Shouldn't persuasion involve confidence, insistence, or a compelling reason to say yes? It turns out, according to psychological research, this is one of the great paradoxes of human behavior. When people feel their freedom is being respected, they drop their defenses. When they're reminded that the choice is entirely theirs, they're more likely to agree. A massive meta-analysis involving over 22,000 participants across 42 separate studies found something astonishing. Simply including a freedom-evoking phrase in a request almost doubled the chances that people would comply. Not increased it slightly. Doubled it. Across cultures, contexts, and causes, from charity donations to survey completions to helping a stranger, the same invisible mechanism played out. A subtle reminder of choice turned hesitation into action. Let's take a closer look at how it works. Imagine someone on the street approaches you and says, "Would you be willing to fill out this quick survey?" Even if you're free, even if you're sympathetic, there's a part of you that tenses up. You sense you're being roped into something. But now imagine the same request with a small addition. Would you be willing to fill out this quick survey? Of course, you're totally free to say no. That simple phrase, "you're totally free to say no," softens the edges. It changes everything. It doesn't add logic or evidence. It adds trust. You don't feel tricked. You don't feel cornered. You feel respected. And in return, you feel open. This is not just etiquette. It's not just politeness. It's persuasion at the deepest level, the kind that bypasses resistance by honoring freedom. The roots of this technique go deeper than a clever communication trick. They tap into the fundamental wiring of the human psyche. We are fiercely protective of our autonomy. When someone tells us what to do, we instinctively resist, even if the thing they want us to do makes sense. This response is known as psychological reactance. It's a subconscious pushback against anything that feels like control. But when that control is removed, when the other person signals you're free to decide, the wall of resistance crumbles. Instead of feeling manipulated, we feel empowered. And empowerment opens the door to agreement. It's as if our mind says, "Because I could say no, I feel safer saying yes." The freedom becomes the bridge. And once we're on it, we're far more likely to cross. What's most fascinating is how subtle the technique is. It requires no charisma, no lengthy explanation, no emotional storytelling. Just a few honest words acknowledging freedom of choice. And yet, those words carry weight, not through volume, but through value. They suggest integrity. They say, "I respect your will." That respect is powerful. We are drawn to those who see us as equals. We are more willing to support those who don't try to coerce us. The very act of granting us autonomy creates a bond, and that bond is the fertile ground where compliance grows. People want to help. They want to contribute, but they don't want to be forced. The "but you are free" technique gives them that rare space to choose freely, and most choose in favor of the one who gave them that freedom. Let's look at some practical examples. Suppose you're trying to encourage someone to donate to a cause. You could say, "Would you consider giving $5 to help us today?" That's straightforward, but it carries pressure. Now try this. Would you consider giving $5 to help us today? Of course, it's completely up to you, only if you want to. That tiny shift makes the difference. Or maybe you're asking your friend for help moving. Hey, can you help me move next Saturday? That's a favor, and they might hesitate. But now try, hey, I'm moving next Saturday, would love your help, but no worries at all if you can't. Again, no pressure. Just clarity, honesty, and freedom. And it works. Not because it hides the ask, but because it respects the asker and the asked alike. This technique can be used in almost any setting, personal, professional, even romantic. Parents might use it with their kids. I'd like you to clean your room today, but it's your choice when you get to it. Managers might say to an employee, I'd appreciate it if this could be done today, but of course, manage it how you think is best. Teachers, doctors, therapists, marketers, anyone in a position of influence can use this gentle persuasion with integrity. It's ethical. It's transparent. It removes guilt and builds trust. It's not manipulation. It's liberation. And it works precisely because it doesn't seek to control. You might be wondering, does this technique always work? Is it a magic phrase? The answer is no. It's not a spell. It's not a guarantee. If someone genuinely doesn't want to say yes, they won't. But what the research shows is this: when people are undecided, when they're open but unsure, when they're on the fence, this technique helps them fall gently to your side. It doesn't twist arms, it untangles them, and it allows the natural generosity of others to rise to the surface without fear of being taken advantage of. In a world full of manipulation, the "but you are free" approach feels like a breath of fresh air. There's also a deeper layer here, one that speaks to how we relate to each other. So much of human communication is layered with invisible power struggles. We don't want to be told. We don't want to be bossed. Even when we agree with the content, we resist the delivery. But when someone speaks with honesty and humility, when they admit, "This is up to you," it disarms our defenses. It shifts the energy. It allows for mutual respect. That's not just good psychology, it's good humanity. Because in the end, what people want more than anything is to feel seen, heard, and respected. The "but you are free" technique delivers all three in a single sentence. Think, too, of how rare this is. Most of our days are filled with messages that subtly or overtly tell us what to do. Buy this. Click that. Say yes. Join now. Obey. Conform. Fit in. So when someone stops and says, "But you are free to choose," it breaks the pattern. It surprises the mind. It quiets the noise. And in that silence, real choice is born. We often think of persuasion as loud, but the most powerful persuasion is sometimes a whisper that says, "Only if it feels right to you." And so, the next time you find yourself needing something, from a favor to a form to a helping hand, try this technique. Make your request honestly. Then add that quiet permission. But you're free to say no. Watch what happens. Watch how people soften. Watch how they lean in, not because they must, but because they choose to. You haven't diminished your influence, you've deepened it. Because when you honor someone's freedom, they're far more likely to honor your request. It's a beautiful irony. The more you let go of control, the more control you actually gain, not over the person, but over the outcome. Not because you pressured them, but because you trusted them. That trust is contagious. It tells the other person you matter. Your will matters. And when people feel that, they often give back, not out of obligation, but out of appreciation. They say yes, not because they were pushed, but because they were seen. In that moment, something subtle and profound happens. Persuasion becomes partnership. So, remember the phrase. Keep it in your back pocket. Use it when you ask, when you invite, when you offer. You'll find it's not just a psychological trick. It's a philosophical stance. A way of showing up in the world that says, "I believe in your right to choose." And when you speak that belief aloud, you might be amazed at how often the world responds with a quiet, heartfelt yes. Anchoring bias. Have you ever walked into a store and seen a jacket priced at $600, only to find another one next to it, marked down to $250? And suddenly, that second jacket feels like a bargain, even if it's still far more than you planned to spend. What just happened? That feeling, the pull of the deal, the sudden shift in your judgment, is not just emotion or salesmanship. It's psychology. It's a mental shortcut your brain took without telling you. And it has a name. It's called anchoring bias. This powerful and often invisible bias happens when our minds rely too heavily on the first piece of information we see, the anchor, when making decisions. That initial number, idea, or suggestion becomes a reference point, and everything that comes after is judged in its shadow. Anchoring is everywhere. In stores, in negotiations, in relationships, and even in how we see ourselves. It's one of the most pervasive and quietly persuasive forces in the human mind. The strange thing is, it often doesn't matter if the anchor is random, arbitrary, or even unrelated. Once it's in your mind, it pulls your thoughts toward it. Researchers have studied this effect in many ways. One famous experiment asked people to spin a wheel rig to stop at either 10 or 65. Then they were asked whether the percentage of African nations in the United Nations was higher or lower than the number on the wheel. Those who saw 65 guessed a much higher number than those who saw 10, even though the wheel had nothing to do with the question. Their brains latched onto the anchor. This phenomenon isn't limited to games or surveys. It plays a huge role in everyday life. I think about salary negotiations. If an employer starts the conversation with a low number, that anchor shapes the entire discussion. Even if you know it's low, your counteroffer might be lower than it would have been otherwise. Or in real estate, when a house is listed at a high price, it changes how potential buyers assess the value, even if they know it's overpriced. The anchor distorts their mental map. And the scariest part is that we rarely notice it happening. Anchoring is subtle. It works beneath awareness. It feels like your own thinking, but it's not. Even experts fall for it. Judges who were shown random numbers before sentencing gave higher sentences when the numbers were high. Financial analysts can be influenced by past market figures, even when they're no longer relevant. Doctors might make different diagnoses based on the first symptoms they hear from a patient. In each case, the anchor sets a frame, and the mind builds around it. It's like throwing a dart at a blank wall and then drawing a target around it, convincing yourself you hit the bullseye. The mind craves a starting point, and once it has one, it rarely strays far from it. So why does the brain work this way? It comes down to how we manage uncertainty. When we don't know what something is worth, be it a price, a risk, or a person, we look for clues. And the first clue we find, no matter how arbitrary, becomes our guide. Our brains are wired to conserve energy, and anchoring is efficient. It gives us a quick shortcut, a mental estimate, a reference. But in doing so, it opens the door to manipulation. Marketers know this. Salespeople know this. Anyone who wants to influence decisions knows this. That's why you'll see original prices slashed on tags, or limited time offers with inflated baselines. The anchor is the hook. And once you're hooked, it's hard to swim free. It doesn't stop at money. Anchoring influences how we think about time, people, danger, beauty, intelligence. If someone is introduced to you as a genius, you'll evaluate everything they say through that lens. If another person is described as troubled, you'll see their actions differently, even if both behave the same. Anchors shape expectations. They frame reality. And once a frame is set, everything inside it looks different. That's the invisible hand of anchoring bias. It doesn't change the facts. It changes how the facts feel. Anchoring can even affect how we judge ourselves. If your childhood was filled with praise, you might set a high anchor for your abilities and expect more from yourself as a result. If you were constantly criticized, that negative anchor may shape your adult self-esteem, even if the criticism was never fair. In this way, the anchors of our past can silently steer our future, unless we notice them and take the wheel. And noticing them isn't always easy, because anchors often feel like truths, but they're not truths. They're starting points. And if you're not careful, someone else might choose them for you. So, how can we defend ourselves from anchoring bias? The first step is awareness. Simply knowing that anchoring exists begins to loosen its grip. When you feel an initial number or description influencing your thoughts, pause. Ask yourself, why am I using this as my baseline? Is it reliable? Is it relevant? Or is it just the first thing I saw? Creating mental space between the anchor and your judgment gives you room to think critically. It allows you to reset your frame, to see not just the price tag, but the value. Not just the label, but the person. Another strategy is to generate multiple anchors. Don't rely on one source. Look at different data points, different opinions, different scenarios. The more anchors you expose yourself to, the less power each individual one holds. It's like tuning into multiple frequencies instead of one loud signal. This helps balance your perspective. It's a way to soften the sway of the first number you see, or the first impression you get. It's a form of mental calibration. You can also practice deliberate detachment. When you know you're being influenced, especially in negotiation or decision making, mentally separate the anchor from your own thinking. Label it. This is their anchor, not mine. Then take a moment to consider what you truly think, want, or believe, without that outside influence. This creates a kind of cognitive reset. It lets your judgment breathe. It puts you back in charge. But anchoring bias isn't always a villain. Like many cognitive shortcuts, it can also be useful. When used ethically, anchoring can guide people through uncertainty. A doctor might present treatment options with a helpful reference. A teacher might compare a new idea to a familiar one to build understanding. Anchors can provide comfort, orientation, and context. The key is intent. Are you using an anchor to clarify or to manipulate? Are you helping someone think or hijacking their thoughts? That distinction matters, because while the brain loves shortcuts, the heart values truth. And persuasion without honesty is not persuasion, it's control. In a way, anchoring bias reveals something deeper about the human experience. We are not blank slates. We're influenced, shaped, framed by what comes first. And while we like to believe we make decisions based on pure logic, the truth is, we are always dancing with context, with contrast, with the invisible echoes of the first thing we saw, heard, or felt. Anchoring bias reminds us that our minds are storytellers, and the first line of the story often sets the tone for everything that follows. This has implications beyond psychology. In communication, in leadership, in conflict resolution, the first words you choose can become anchors. The first tone you strike, the first metaphor you use, the first image you paint, they all set the frame. They influence how everything else will be received. That's why clarity matters. That's why the beginning of a conversation is never just a prelude. It's the foundation. And if you choose the wrong anchor, you might spend the rest of the exchange swimming against the current. There's also a personal insight here. Sometimes we get stuck in old patterns, old labels, old beliefs, because they were our first anchors. Someone told us we weren't good enough, or that success looked a certain way, and we built our thinking around that frame. But what if that anchor was false? What if it no longer serves you? The beauty of the mind is that it can rewrite its own stories. You can choose a new anchor, a new beginning, a new baseline, one that reflects your growth, your truth, your worth. That choice belongs to you. Anchoring bias shows us how fragile and flexible our minds can be. It humbles us, but it also empowers us. Because once you see the strings, you can stop being the puppet. You can start questioning first impressions. You can ask for second opinions. You can slow down just enough to hear your own voice beneath the echo of the anchor. And in that space, real thinking begins. So, the next time you hear a number, a label, or a claim, pause. Ask yourself, is this the truth, or just the first thing I heard? Am I judging wisely, or just reacting to an anchor? That moment of awareness might not feel like much, but it's a crack in the frame, a breath of freedom, a step towards seeing the world, not through the lens of what came first, but through the clarity of your own judgment. Illusory truth effect. Have you ever caught yourself believing something, only to later realize it wasn't true? Not because you had evidence, not because you examined it closely, but simply because you had heard it before. Maybe it was an odd historical fact, a health claim, a famous quote, or a story passed around your social circle. It felt familiar. It felt true. And that feeling, so quiet and subtle, can be deceptive. This experience is more common than we realize, and it stems from a powerful psychological bias known as the illusory truth effect. It's the tendency to believe a statement is true just because we've heard it more than once, not because it's backed by evidence, but because repetition has made it familiar. And in our brains, familiarity often feels like truth. This phenomenon has been studied extensively in psychology. It's not limited to gullibility or a lack of intelligence. Even well-informed, skeptical people can fall prey to it. The brain is wired to save effort. When a statement feels easy to process, when it rolls off the tongue or echoes something we've already heard, it's processed more fluently. This processing fluency is then misinterpreted as accuracy. The logic is subtle but powerful. This feels easy to understand, so it must be right. The more times we're exposed to a phrase, the more fluent it becomes. And the more fluent it becomes, the more credible it seems. This is the heart of the illusory truth effect. It's why advertising works. It's why political slogans repeat the same phrases over and over. It's why conspiracy theories gain traction, even in the absence of evidence. The message doesn't need to be convincing at first. It just needs to be repeated. Over time, the brain begins to lower its defenses. It doesn't matter if we originally questioned it. With enough exposure, skepticism fades. The statement becomes a part of the mental wallpaper, background noise we start mistaking for reality. This is the danger of repetition. And it's not limited to mass media. It happens in casual conversations, in childhood memories, in rumors shared among friends. One classic study on the illusory truth effect gave participants trivia statements and asked them to rate their truthfulness. Some were accurate, others were false. But later, when participants were shown the same statements again, alongside new ones, they consistently rated the repeated ones as more likely to be true, even when they were false. The effect was strong. Even a single exposure to a statement could boost its perceived truthfulness the next time around. And this didn't change when the participants were told to evaluate the claims critically. The repetition still worked its quiet magic. This suggests the illusory truth effect is not just about attention. It's about how our minds make sense of reality, through ease, rhythm, and repetition. In a world overflowing with information, this bias becomes even more powerful. Think about how often we scroll through headlines, memes, and snippets of data. We absorb phrases without realizing it. We store fragments. We remember tones, not sources. And when those phrases return, perhaps on a billboard or in a conversation, they don't feel new. They feel familiar. And that familiarity often overrides our critical thinking. It's not that we blindly believe everything we see. It's that we gradually stop questioning what we've seen many times. Repetition doesn't just reinforce memory. It creates an illusion of truth. That's what makes it so subtle, so persuasive, so dangerous. But like many cognitive biases, the illusory truth effect is not always malicious. It can also be used for good. If you've ever practiced positive affirmations, you're using this principle. By repeating statements like "I am enough" or "I choose calm over chaos," you are gradually convincing your brain to accept them as truth. At first, these phrases may feel hollow, but over time, with repetition, they gain emotional weight. They start to feel real. And that feeling can shape behavior, self-image, even identity. The illusory truth effect, when used ethically, can be a tool for healing, growth, and transformation. The key lies in intention. In teaching, repetition is vital. A good teacher repeats core concepts, not to patronize but to make them stick. The more times a student hears a fundamental truth, the more likely it becomes part of their mental framework. In public speaking, effective communicators use repetition to anchor ideas. I have a dream. Yes, we can. Make America great again. These phrases became powerful not because they were detailed arguments, but because they were memorable and repeated. The repetition etched them into public consciousness. It's a lesson in how truth, or the illusion of it, is crafted, not just discovered. But there's a dark side too. Propaganda relies on repetition. So do cults. So do marketing campaigns designed to exploit fear, insecurity, or tribal identity. They don't need to prove their point. They just need to repeat it until it becomes a mental habit. The brain, over time, stops resisting. It stops checking. It settles into the rhythm. And when the rhythm is familiar, it becomes hard to tell truth from repetition. That's how fake facts survive. That's how urban legends spread. That's how political lies gain momentum. Not by logic, but by echo. This is why media literacy is so important. In a world of constant messaging, we must become aware of what we're repeatedly exposed to. Ask yourself, where have I heard this before? Why does it feel true? Have I examined the facts or just grown used to the phrase? Becoming aware of the illusory truth effect helps break the spell. It allows us to slow down, to trace the roots of our beliefs, to question what we know. And that questioning is the beginning of wisdom. There's also a personal lesson here. Be mindful of the things you repeat to yourself, the quiet mantras of your inner voice. If you keep telling yourself, I'm not good enough or I always mess things up, your brain may start to believe it, not because it's true, but because it's familiar. This is where the illusory truth effect turns inward. Our repeated self-talk becomes our belief system, and our belief system becomes our reality. So choose your repetitions wisely. Choose them with care, because every repeated phrase is planting something in the soil of your mind. It's also important to be conscious of the messages we share with others. What we repeat in conversation, what we post online, what we endorse casually, even in jest, can become anchors for other people's beliefs. Repetition is contagious. A phrase you say often might be the seed of someone else's truth. So, speak with intention. Don't just pass along what sounds good. Ask, is this true, or just repeated? Is it helpful, or just familiar? In a noisy world, the most ethical thing we can do is pause before echoing. Repetition is a double-edged sword. It can open minds or close them. It can heal or deceive. The illusory truth effect sits quietly at the crossroads of attention and belief. It reminds us that the mind is not a neutral recorder of facts. It's a rhythm-sensitive machine, a pattern-seeking storyteller. And when the same phrase appears again and again, the mind doesn't just remember, it agrees. Unless we intervene, unless we question the chorus, unless we become the conductor of our own thoughts, rather than just another echo in the room. To live wisely in a world of repetition, we must become aware of our own cognitive rhythms. We must learn to distinguish between familiarity and fact, between a truth we've examined and one we've simply heard too many times. This awareness takes practice. It requires a slowing down of mental reflexes, a gentle pause after the second or third repetition, a moment to ask, is this true or just rehearsed? In that pause, clarity returns. In that pause, truth is given a chance to speak. So the next time a phrase feels strangely believable, ask yourself where you heard it before. Ask how many times you've heard it. Ask whether it earned your trust or simply borrowed it through repetition. And when you speak to yourself or to others, speak truth, not just echoes. Because what we repeat, we become. What we repeat, we teach. And what we repeat, we eventually believe, whether it's true or not. Reactance and reverse psychology. Have you ever been told what to do and immediately felt the urge to do the opposite? Even if the suggestion made sense, even if you might have agreed at first, Something about being told ignited a silent resistance. That feeling isn't always rebelliousness or spite. It's something deeper, more universal, more human. It's called psychological reactance. This subtle but powerful phenomenon occurs when we sense that our freedom of choice is being threatened. In that moment, the mind pushes back, not always because it wants something else, but because it wants to protect its right to choose. And in that protective push, the opposite of the intended outcome is often born. Reactance explains a strange and familiar dynamic we've all experienced. The more we're pressured, the more we resist. The more we're told what not to do, the more tempting it becomes. The moment someone says, "You can't," our brain replies, "Just watch me." This principle is at the heart of what we call reverse psychology, the strategic art of encouraging someone to do something by suggesting the opposite. Tell a child not to play with a toy, and suddenly, that toy becomes irresistible. Warn someone that they're probably not ready for a challenge, and you might just inspire them to take it on with renewed determination. It's a paradox, a dance of autonomy, and it begins the moment freedom feels endangered. Reactance isn't just found in children or teens. It's in adults, in leaders, in professionals, in you and me. It's not immaturity, it's identity protection. Our sense of self is tightly bound to the idea of control. When that control is undermined, even slightly, a quiet rebellion starts to simmer. Sometimes it's external. We defy authority, ignore warnings, or take risks. Sometimes it's internal. We procrastinate on goals we set for ourselves, resist healthy habits, or abandon plans we consciously created. It's not always logical, but it's deeply human. We don't just want to do the right thing. We want to choose it freely. This is why force often backfires. When someone is too persuasive, too commanding, too certain, they risk provoking reactance. Even a helpful suggestion can be met with resistance if it feels like pressure. The more someone insists, the more we recoil. The more they explain, the more we question. This is not a flaw in our thinking. It's a safeguard. Reactance evolved as a defense mechanism against coercion. It keeps us from being too easily swayed. It ensures that our choices, even when imperfect, are ours. That sense of ownership is vital. And if it's taken away, even with good intentions, we resist not necessarily the outcome, but the feeling of being handled. Let's look at a classic example. A teenager is told, "You are absolutely forbidden from seeing those friends." Instantly, those friends gain a new allure. It's not just about companionship anymore. It's about reclaiming the right to decide. The prohibition transforms the forbidden into the desired. And the harder the parent pushes, the more the teen pulls away. This is not disobedience for the sake of rebellion. It's a psychological reflex, a way of saying, "This part of my life belongs to me." Ironically, a gentler approach, one that allows space for conversation and autonomy, might have prevented the very behavior that caused concern in the first place. Reverse psychology uses this principle intentionally. It flips the script. Instead of demanding or persuading, it subtly challenges or withdraws. For instance, saying, "You probably wouldn't want to join this. It's kind of boring," might prompt someone to prove you wrong. Not because they care about the task, but because they want to protect their freedom to decide. The key here is tone and subtlety. If it feels too obvious, it backfires. If it feels manipulative, it breeds resentment. But when done lightly, playfully, or with authenticity, it can bypass resistance and invite choice. That invitation can be more effective than a command ever could be. This technique can be applied in work settings, parenting, relationships, and even self-motivation. Imagine a manager saying to an employee, "This project's optional. Feel free to pass if you're not interested." Suddenly, the project doesn't feel like a burden. It feels like a choice. And choice invites ownership. The employee may lean in, not to follow orders, but to follow curiosity. Or think of a partner saying, "It's totally fine if you'd rather skip the party, I get it." That freedom can make the party seem more appealing. It's not the event itself that changed. It's the pressure that lifted. And in its absence, willingness grows. But reverse psychology is not a tool to be wielded carelessly. If used too often, or without care, it can erode trust. People don't like to feel manipulated. And once they realize what's happening, reactance returns with even more force. That's why ethical persuasion always honors autonomy. It invites, rather than insists. It opens the door rather than dragging someone through it. When in doubt, sincerity is better than strategy. Because while reverse psychology can work in the short term, true influence requires transparency. Reactance can also show up internally. Sometimes we set goals, healthy habits, new routines, personal promises, and then sabotage them. Not because we don't want the outcome, but because something about the shit triggers resistance. I have to exercise. I must meditate every morning. I need to stop procrastinating. These phrases, though well-meaning, create pressure. They transform choices into obligations. And that shift is enough to trigger internal reactance. The very goals we care about start to feel like burdens. And the more we push ourselves, the more we resist. It's a strange loop, self-imposed pressure that leads to self-sabotage. The way out is reframing. Instead of I have to, try I choose to. Instead of I should try I'd like to. This subtle shift returns freedom to the decision. It reminds the mind that you're not being forced, you're choosing. And choice is empowering. It reignites motivation not from pressure, but from alignment. When we feel ownership over our goals, we're more likely to follow through. When we feel cornered by them, we push back, even against ourselves. In this way, reactance isn't a flaw to eliminate, it's a signal to listen to. When resistance arises, ask, where do I feel controlled? Whose voice am I obeying right now? Is this coming from pressure or from my own values? Often, the problem isn't the task, it's the loss of autonomy. Reconnecting with your sense of choice can dissolve that tension. It can turn resentment into resolve. Not by adding more pressure, but by removing it. There's a broader lesson here about human communication. Influence is not about overpowering someone's will, it's about aligning with it. The best persuaders don't push. They don't demand. They create space. They invite. They offer. And they make it clear, the final decision is always yours. That respect softens the mind. It opens the heart. And in that openness, real change becomes possible. We live in a world where people are constantly told what to do, what to buy, how to think, how to feel. And in response, we're often quietly pushing back, not because the messages are wrong, but because we crave sovereignty. We want to decide for ourselves. Reactance reminds us of that desire. It's not childish. It's not irrational. It's the mind's way of saying, I am still in charge here. And the more you honor that voice in yourself and in others, the more harmony you'll find in your interactions. So the next time you feel resistance, pause. Don't fight it. Listen. Ask what freedom it's trying to protect. And if you're trying to influence someone, don't take that freedom away. Instead, hand it back to them. Let them decide. You may be surprised how often people say yes once they're free to say no. Pygmalion Effect. Tame. Sometimes the greatest power we hold over someone else's life is not what we say or do, but what we believe. Quietly, deeply, consistently. Because those beliefs, often invisible and unspoken, ripple outward. They shape our tone, our actions, our energy. They guide the questions we ask, the chances we give, the patience we offer. And over time, those subtle signals become the scaffolding around another person's potential. This is the heart of the Pygmalion Effect, a quiet force where higher expectations lead to better performance. Not through pressure or punishment, but through belief. Belief that inspires, that nurtures, that calls something greater out of someone simply by expecting it to emerge. The name comes from mythology. Pygmalion was a sculptor who carved a statue so beautiful, he fell in love with it. Moved by his devotion, the goddess Aphrodite brought the statue to life. The metaphor lives on in psychology. When we see the best in someone and treat them as if that best is real and rising, they often grow into it. The expectation becomes the spark. And what starts as belief becomes reality, not because of magic, but because of feedback loops built from attention, encouragement, and opportunity. The most famous study of this effect was done in a school. Researchers told teachers that certain students had shown signs of being intellectual bloomers. What the teachers didn't know was that these students were chosen at random. There was no evidence of higher ability, only the planted belief that there was. And over the course of the school year, those students did, in fact, bloom. Their IQ scores rose. Their performance improved. Not because they were different, but because they were treated as if they were different. The teachers, without realizing it, gave them more time, more feedback, more warmth. The students responded, not to the reality of who they were, but to the reality of what someone believed they could be. That's the power of expectations. They don't just reflect the future, they help create it. And they do it through hundreds of small signals: the tone of a voice, the patience in a correction, the depth of a question. When someone expects you to succeed, you sense it. When they expect you to fail, you feel that too. And over time, those signals shape how you see yourself. If you're expected to rise, you stretch a little higher. If you're expected to struggle, you might not even try. The mind absorbs those cues and turns them into internal narratives. Maybe I can, or why bother? This doesn't just happen in classrooms. It happens in workplaces, in families and friendships. A manager who believes in her team's creativity gives them room to innovate. A coach who expects discipline inspires commitment. A parent who believes their child is resilient gives them the freedom to fail and try again. And the reverse is also true. The Golem Effect, the shadow side of Pygmalion, shows how low expectations can drag someone down. If you expect little from someone, you give them fewer chances, offer less support, show less trust. They notice. They internalize it. And often, they fulfill that low vision, not because of laziness, but because of a quiet erosion of belief. This is why leadership is so powerful and so delicate. Every belief a leader holds filters into behavior. Every assumption they carry echoes in their team. A teacher's quiet confidence in a student can spark a lifelong passion. A supervisor's belief in a worker's intelligence can lift someone's entire career. But skepticism and doubt, especially when disguised as realism, can become self-fulfilling too. This is not about pretending everyone is excellent. It's about treating potential as something alive, something that grows in the soil of belief. When people feel believed in, they often start to believe in themselves, and that belief fuels effort, resilience, and performance. The Pygmalion Effect doesn't only apply to others, it works inward too. What you expect of yourself quietly shapes what you become. If you carry the belief that you're capable of growth, you'll put in more effort. You'll try again when you fail. You'll push a little harder through resistance, not because it's easy, but because your belief in improvement pulls you forward. On the other hand, if you expect that you'll always fall short, that belief becomes a ceiling, one you can't see but feel. And over time, you stop trying to break through it. Self-fulfilling prophecies are not fantasies. They are behavioral cycles, and those cycles are built on expectation. This is why it's so important to examine the stories you tell yourself. What do you expect of your intelligence, your creativity, your relationships, your future? These expectations are not passive thoughts. They are lenses. And through those lenses, you interpret success and failure differently. If you believe you can grow, a mistake becomes a lesson. If you believe you're doomed to fail, the same mistake becomes proof. The facts don't change, but the frame does. And the frame shapes how you feel, what you do, and what comes next. You can use this to your advantage. Start by choosing to believe in your capacity, not in a shallow, motivational way, but in a quiet, daily way. Expect that with effort and focus you can improve. Expect that setbacks are temporary. Expect that persistence will pay off. These expectations, when consistent, start to feed behavior. You practice more. You ask better questions. You surround yourself with growth. And those behaviors in time make the belief true. Not because belief alone changes the world, but because belief changes you, and you change the world. The same goes for how we treat those closest to us. Consider the subtle difference between saying, "He's just not good at math," versus, "He hasn't found the right strategy yet." One locks someone in place. The other opens a door. One sees limits. The other sees potential. It's easy to slip into fixed expectations, especially when we think we're being realistic. But realism isn't just about acknowledging where someone is. It's also about recognizing where they could go. When we choose to see growth as possible, we treat people differently, and that treatment plants seeds. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone is, "I believe you can." But a word of caution: the Pygmalion Effect is not about pressure. It's not about demanding excellence or setting impossible standards. It's about belief, not burden. When expectations become pressure, they can backfire. Instead of inspiring, they overwhelm. Instead of motivating, they paralyze. The key is to pair belief with support. High expectations must come with high encouragement. Challenge must come with compassion. When people feel safe and seen, belief lifts them. When they feel judged and watched, belief can crush them. This is why the way we believe in others matters as much as the belief itself. There's also an element of humility here. The Pygmalion Effect invites us to examine our own biases. Who do we expect to succeed? Who do we quietly doubt? Often, our expectations are shaped by past experiences, stereotypes, or unconscious assumptions. But those expectations can limit others, not because they're true, but because we've stopped looking beyond them. By becoming aware of our beliefs, we can choose better ones. We can choose to see possibility where we once saw limitation. And that choice might be the turning point in someone else's story. In a world that often reduces people to labels, scores, or first impressions, the Pygmalion Effect reminds us that human potential is not fixed. It's fluid, responsive, shaped by care, attention, and expectation. And we are all sculptors, sculpting with our beliefs, our encouragement, our patience. Every time we expect the best in someone, we give them a chance to rise. Every time we expect little, we shrink the space in which they grow. So be intentional with your expectations. Believe in the people around you. Believe in your students, your children, your team. Believe in yourself, not blindly, not unrealistically, but boldly, quietly, consistently. Because belief is not just something we feel. It's something we do, and when done well, it becomes contagious. It spreads. It lifts. It changes what people try, how they act, and who they become. You don't have to tell someone they're extraordinary. You only have to treat them as if they could be. You only have to speak to their potential instead of their past, to ask better questions, to offer more time, to believe that beneath every hesitation is a possibility waiting to be called forward, and in calling it forward, you participate in its becoming. Because people more often than not live up or down to what is expected of them. So set the bar high, not with pressure, not with perfection, but with quiet belief. That belief may just become the most powerful gift you ever give. Hawthorne Effect. Sometimes, just knowing someone is watching changes everything. You might stand a little taller, speak with more clarity, or stay more focused on the task at hand. And you may not even notice it happening. There's a quiet shift, an invisible thread connecting your awareness of being seen to the way you perform. This subtle phenomenon is known as the Hawthorne Effect. It's the tendency for people to change or improve aspects of their behavior simply because they know they're being observed, not because of rewards, not because of punishment, but because of attention. The story behind it begins in the 1920s at the Hawthorne Works factory near Chicago. Researchers wanted to understand how different working conditions affected employee productivity. So they experimented with changes, brighter lighting, more frequent breaks, shorter workdays. And to their surprise, productivity improved almost every time, but not for the reasons they expected. It didn't matter whether the lights were dimmed or brightened, whether the breaks were longer or shorter. Output increased simply because the workers knew they were being studied. They felt noticed, and that feeling sparked motivation. That's the essence of the Hawthorne Effect. When people sense they're being observed, they tend to rise to the occasion. It's not necessarily about surveillance or scrutiny. It's about attention, the sense that someone cares, that someone is paying enough interest to notice what you're doing. That feeling, even when subtle, can energize effort. It can bring out discipline, focus, and pride. It creates a temporary halo around your actions, a soft pressure to do your best, not because someone asked, but because someone might be watching. You've probably experienced this yourself. Maybe you work better in a public space like a library or cafe, simply because being around others nudges you into a more focused mode. Or maybe you clean your apartment more thoroughly when guests are coming over. Or you sit up straighter in a meeting when your manager enters the room. These moments seem small, but they reflect something deep in human psychology. We are social creatures, and being seen, even in the background, makes us want to show up as our best selves. The Hawthorne Effect isn't about faking or performing. It's about activation. It's about how the simple presence of attention can bring dormant motivation to life. Think of it like sunlight touching a seed. The seed already holds the potential, but the light awakens it. In this way, observation becomes a catalyst. It doesn't inject something new. It reveals what was always there, waiting to be drawn out. And this principle isn't just academic. It has practical applications in everyday life. For one, it can be used as a personal productivity tool. If you're trying to build better habits, don't rely solely on willpower. Create an environment of light observation. Work in a space where others are present. Join a co-working group. Exercise with a friend. Share your goals with someone you trust. These forms of gentle accountability can enhance your discipline, not because anyone is judging you, but because their presence reminds you to stay engaged. You can also observe yourself. This is a quieter but equally powerful form of the Hawthorne Effect. Journaling your meals, tracking your sleep, writing down your workouts, these acts of self-observation create the same internal shift. They remind you that your actions matter, that someone is paying attention, even if it's just you, and that awareness creates mindfulness. It slows you down. It makes you more intentional. Over time, this kind of self-accountability becomes a mirror, helping you stay aligned with your values. In leadership, the Hawthorne Effect can be used to uplift others. Managers, teachers, parents, anyone in a guiding role can spark better performance simply by showing sincere interest. When a leader checks in regularly, asks meaningful questions, or simply observes someone's work with care, it sends a message: what you're doing matters. I see you. And that message, even when unspoken, often leads to greater effort, pride, and progress, not because of pressure, but because of connection. But this effect isn't permanent. One of its limits is that the motivational boost often fades once the observation stops, or once the novelty wears off. When people no longer feel seen, their energy may drift. This is why sustainable systems of accountability are so valuable. Regular check-ins, feedback loops, group support, structures that maintain attention without turning into control. The goal isn't surveillance, it's presence. Attention that uplifts, not attention that suffocates. The Hawthorne Effect also offers a quiet insight into human nature. We don't just work for results. We work for meaning. And meaning is often found in relationship, in being part of something, in knowing that someone else notices the effort, the detail, the care. That simple recognition, you're not invisible, can carry someone through the hardest days. It's a reminder that behind every behavior, behind every task, there's a human story unfolding. And when that story is witnessed, it flourishes. There's a beautiful paradox here. We often think that freedom means doing things when no one is watching. And in one sense, that's true. Integrity is revealed in solitude, but motivation often blooms in companionship, not in performance, but in presence. The awareness that someone is nearby, paying quiet attention, can be a powerful force, not because they control us, but because they reflect us. They remind us who we want to be. This is also why community matters. Support groups, study circles, workout buddies, creative partners. These are not just people to impress. They are mirrors. They help us see ourselves through new eyes. They help us stay consistent when motivation wavers. Not through judgment, but through presence. Their attention doesn't demand perfection. It invites effort. And that invitation is sometimes all we need. The Hawthorne Effect can also serve as a caution. When people are being watched, they may overcompensate. They may prioritize appearances over substance. Focus on short-term boosts instead of long-term growth. This is why the effect can be temporary. If observation feels artificial, or if it becomes intrusive, people may burn out. They may lose authenticity. That's why the quality of attention matters just as much as its presence. Sincere interest fosters growth. Superficial surveillance creates tension. In parenting, this principle shows up often. A child who knows their parent is watching, gently, lovingly, may behave with more care, not out of fear, but because the bond matters. And as they grow, self-observation begins to replace that external gaze. They start to carry the presence of care within them. That's how internal motivation is born. It begins with being seen and grows into seeing oneself clearly. So how can you use the Hawthorne Effect wisely? First, don't rely on it as a trick. Use it as a tool. If you're trying to change a habit, build a system of light accountability. Surround yourself with people who care. Track your actions in a way that feels kind, not punishing. Let observation be a form of support, not surveillance. Second, be a source of attention for others. Show people you notice them, not just their results, but their effort, their quiet progress, their small wins. Attention doesn't have to be grand. It can be as simple as a check-in, a nod, a few sincere words. I saw what you did. It mattered. Those words linger. They grow into motivation. And finally, recognize the power of being witnessed, whether by others or by yourself. We live in a fast-moving world where so much feels unseen. But the act of observing, gently, consistently, can be a source of strength. When you know someone cares, or when you care enough to track your own path, it changes the way you walk. You lift your eyes. You take the next step with intention. Because sometimes the difference between drifting and growing is simple. It's the difference between being invisible and being seen. Liking gap. There's a quiet moment after nearly every social encounter that many of us know too well. The conversation ends, the goodbyes are exchanged, and as we walk away, smiling on the outside, we begin to question everything on the inside. Did I talk too much? Did I come off awkward? Did they enjoy that conversation, or were they just being polite? These doubts swirl, persistent and self-critical. And more often than not, they whisper the same verdict. They probably didn't like me that much. But what if that voice is wrong? What if, in truth, they liked you more than you realized? This is not just a comforting thought. It's a psychological reality. It's called the liking gap. A phenomenon where we consistently underestimate how much other people enjoy our company. When strangers meet and talk, even when the conversation flows naturally, each person tends to believe the other liked them less than they actually did. Not because of how they behaved, but because of how the human mind works. We are often our own harshest critics, trapped in an internal dialogue that downplays connection and amplifies perceived flaws. The liking gap was first documented in a series of studies that brought strangers together and asked them to interact. Afterward, participants were asked to rate how much they liked their conversation partner and how much they believed the other person liked them in return. The results were consistent and striking. People almost always underestimated how much they were liked. They thought they were less interesting, less funny, and less engaging than they were actually perceived to be. And this wasn't just a one-time effect. In studies involving longer relationships, such as college roommates, the liking gap persisted for weeks and months before eventually fading. This phenomenon reveals something deeply important. We often see our social selves through a distorted lens. After a conversation, we tend to fixate on awkward pauses, jokes that didn't land, or moments when we stumbled over our words. But the other person, they don't see those moments with the same weight. They remember the smile, the shared laughter, the curiosity, the warmth. They're not dissecting the exchange, they're just appreciating the connection. Yet because we live inside our own minds, we rarely give ourselves that same grace. And so, the gap forms, not in reality, but in perception. This has real consequences. The liking gap can quietly discourage us from reaching out, initiating friendships, or following up after a good conversation. We assume others are indifferent or underwhelmed by us, when in fact they may be feeling quite the opposite. And so we hold back. We let potential connections fade. We withdraw, not because we were rejected, but because we imagined we were. That self-doubt becomes a filter, turning neutral moments into negative memories. And over time, it reinforces the belief that we're less likable than we truly are. But once you understand the liking gap, something beautiful happens. You begin to question that harsh inner voice. You start to soften the self-criticism and replace it with curiosity. What if they actually enjoyed that? What if I made a better impression than I think? This shift doesn't require arrogance, it simply invites balance. It reminds you that your internal monologue is not always a reliable narrator, that your feelings of awkwardness are often invisible to others, that the very things you worry about are rarely what people remember. Think about the last time you spoke with someone new, a colleague, a classmate, a stranger at a gathering. Chances are you spent some time afterward reflecting on how you came across. But ask yourself this: how deeply did you judge them? How many of their sentences did you analyze? How closely did you scrutinize their every gesture? Probably not much. You were too focused on the conversation, on connecting, on being present. And that's likely how they felt about you. Engaged, interested, not dissecting every word, but appreciating the shared moment. The liking gap is not a weakness, it's a side effect of self-awareness. It arises from our natural desire to make good impressions, to be accepted, to belong. But sometimes, that desire becomes self-sabotage. We become so concerned with how we're being perceived that we forget to trust in how we showed up. And in that forgetting, we lose sight of a simple truth: most people are kinder in their judgments of us than we are. In a world filled with curated images and constant comparison, this bias can deepen. We assume others are more confident, more charming, more socially fluent than we are. But the research tells a different story. Everyone is carrying their own quiet doubts. Everyone worries, at times, that they came off the wrong way. Everyone experiences the liking gap, even those who seem effortlessly at ease. This shared insecurity is part of what makes us human. And when you realize that, you stop feeling so alone in your doubts. So how do you use this knowledge to grow? The first step is simple awareness. The next time you finish a conversation, notice the critical thoughts that arise and gently question them. Instead of accepting them as fact, ask, is this the liking gap speaking? Assume a more generous default: they probably liked me more than I think. This isn't about delusion. It's about recalibrating your lens, balancing the scales, giving yourself the same kindness and openness you would naturally give someone else. You can also use the liking gap to build social courage. If you're hesitant to reach out to someone you spoke with recently, remind yourself that they likely left the conversation with a positive impression. That message you're debating sending, that invitation you're unsure about, go for it. The gap between how you think they feel and how they actually feel is often wider than you imagine, and more favorable, too. Most people are far more open to connection than we give them credit for. They're not waiting for perfect words. They're just happy someone remembered. In longer-term relationships, the liking gap offers another insight. Just because someone hasn't said how much they value you doesn't mean they don't. Often, people carry warmth and respect quietly, without expressing it. Don't assume silence means indifference. Don't assume the absence of praise means the absence of appreciation. Many people think highly of you without ever saying it aloud. And sometimes all it takes is a little vulnerability to close that gap. A simple "Hey, I really enjoy talking with you" can open doors you didn't know existed. There's also a lesson here for self-talk. The way we narrate our social experiences matters. If every interaction is followed by harsh self-assessment, we start to avoid socializing altogether. But if we practice post-conversation kindness, reminding ourselves that we were probably liked more than we felt, we build a new mental habit, one that's rooted in reality, not in fear. Over time, this changes how we show up. We become more relaxed, more authentic, more willing to engage, and those qualities, in turn, make us even more likable. Ultimately, the liking gap invites a new kind of confidence. Not the loud, showy kind, but a quiet, steady trust in our ability to connect. It reminds us that most people want to like us, that they're not looking for perfection, they're looking for presence, a smile, a genuine question, a moment of laughter. That's what people remember, not the words you stumbled over, not the moment you blanked, but the fact that you showed up with warmth, with interest, with humanity. So the next time you catch yourself replaying a conversation in your mind, doubting how you came across, take a breath. Remember the research. Remember the reality. You were probably liked more than you think. The other person, more than likely, walked away with a quiet appreciation, a positive feeling, a willingness to talk again. That coworker? They enjoyed your chat. That stranger? They liked your vibe. That classmate? They're glad you introduced yourself. You don't have to win every conversation. You just have to show up honestly and let the connection unfold. Most of the time, your worst fears are just echoes, but your warmth, that was real, and it was felt. Self-distancing. Third-person self-talk. There are moments in life when emotions seem to take over, when anxiety, anger, or self-doubt cloud our thinking. In these moments, we often get trapped in our heads, tangled in loops of rumination and overwhelmed by feeling. We ask ourselves, why am I so upset? Or why can't I calm down? And yet the more we focus inward with this intensity, the more the emotion seems to grow. What if the answer to calming down wasn't pushing harder, but stepping back? Not turning off the emotion, but changing the way we talk to ourselves. This is the quiet power of self-distancing, a technique that invites us to observe our inner world, not as the actor, but as the advisor. At its core, self-distancing involves psychologically stepping back from your immediate emotions. It's a shift in perspective, one that turns the storm into a scene. And one of the simplest, most accessible ways to do this is through third-person self-talk. Instead of saying, "Why am I feeling this way?" you say, "Why is John feeling this way?" Or, "Okay, Sarah is anxious right now. What would help her feel grounded?" It sounds unusual at first, but this subtle change, referring to yourself by name or from a distance, has been shown in research to create powerful emotional clarity. Studies by psychologist Ethan Cross and colleagues at the University of Michigan have explored this phenomenon in depth. Using brain imaging and real-world scenarios, they found that when people talk to themselves in the third person, their brain activity resembled someone advising a friend rather than reacting emotionally. The self-talk activated regions associated with logic and self-control, rather than the hot zones of emotional reactivity. In practical terms, this means that third-person self-talk helps you become your own calm, wise advisor, not your panicked, overwhelmed self. Think of how you speak to a friend who's struggling. You're probably supportive, balanced, kind. You see their emotions, but you're not consumed by them. you offer perspective. That's the gift of distance. But when it comes to ourselves, we often lose that clarity. We speak harshly, think narrowly, and amplify distress. Third-person self-talk interrupts that pattern. It turns the conversation outward, softens the tone, and allows the rational mind to return. It's not denial. It's not detachment. It's a clearer lens. Let's take an example. Imagine you're about to give a presentation and you feel a surge of panic. In first person, your mind says, "I'm nervous. I can't mess this up. What if I fail?" But in third person, it shifts to, "Okay, Alex is feeling anxious. That makes sense. It's an important talk. What does Alex need to feel more confident right now?" See the difference? The panic turns into a problem to solve. You are no longer fused with the fear, you're helping someone through it, and that someone just happens to be you. Self-distancing is especially useful in high-stress situations. In another study, participants were asked to give a public speech, a famously stressful task. Some spoke to themselves in the first person. Others used third-person self-talk. Those who created distance not only reported less anxiety during the speech, but also recovered more quickly afterward. They ruminated less. They bounced back faster. The same principle held in decision-making scenarios. When facing a tough choice, those who used a distance perspective made wiser, more future-oriented decisions. They were less swayed by temporary emotions and more grounded in long-term values. This technique also applies to anger. Imagine someone cuts you off in traffic or criticizes you unfairly. In the moment, your mind floods with emotion. "I can't believe this. I'm furious." But now pause, breathe. Shift the frame. Mark is feeling angry right now. He's been under pressure all day, and this just pushed a button. What would help him cool down? Again, the emotion doesn't vanish, but it becomes manageable. You've stepped out of the fire and into the balcony. You're watching the storm from above, not getting swept away in it. This kind of self-talk is not just for extreme emotions. It can be used gently, every day, as a form of inner coaching. When faced with temptation, fatigue, or self-doubt, you might say, "Rachel, you've gotten through tougher days than this," or "Chris, it's okay to feel tired, but you've got this next step in you." This tone, calm, compassionate, encouraging, is often the one we reserve for others. But when we use it for ourselves, it builds resilience. It creates emotional safety. And it reminds us that we are not just the voices in our heads. We are also the observer, the guide, the calm in the middle of the storm. There's something beautifully empowering about becoming your own coach. Not a drill sergeant, not a critic, but a wise companion walking alongside you. Someone who knows your struggles and strengths. Someone who speaks with patience. Third-person self-talk helps you access that version of yourself. It doesn't remove emotion, but it repositions it. You're still feeling, but you're also thinking. You're still in it, but not lost in it. And over time, this habit rewires how you relate to yourself. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond thoughtfully. Instead of spiraling in anxiety, find clarity. It becomes easier to ask better questions. What would help him right now? What choice aligns with her values? What would be best for your name 1 week from now? These questions don't just soothe the emotions, they shape character. They strengthen the connection between who you are now and who you're becoming. The benefits of self-distancing extend into relationships too. When you're caught in conflict, switching to a third-person view can help you de-escalate. It allows you to pause and ask, "What's really going on with me right now?" Or "What does your name need to say that isn't being said clearly?" This reflection can turn arguments into dialogue. It reduces defensiveness. It opens space for empathy, not just toward others, but toward yourself. And this tool is always available. You don't need a quiet room or a therapist's office. You just need a moment of awareness, a breath, a pause, and the willingness to see yourself with a bit more perspective. You don't even have to speak the words aloud. Just hearing your own name in your inner dialogue is enough to shift the frame. It may feel awkward at first, but with time it becomes natural, and with consistency it becomes powerful. The truth is, we're all living inside fast-moving thoughts, intense feelings, and swirling doubts. But we are not just those thoughts. We are also the witness, the voice of calm, the inner guide. Third-person self-talk is a doorway into that identity. It says, I can be the one who feels and the one who helps. I can sit with my emotion and still see clearly. I can navigate the hard moments, not by pushing them away, but by stepping back just enough to move through them. So, the next time you feel overwhelmed, pause, use your name. Shift the voice. Say, okay, Jordan is struggling right now, and that's understandable. What would help them move forward? Let that question hang. Let it guide you. Because in that shift you'll find something rare and steady, a calm center, a wiser mind, and a softer heart toward yourself. Effect labeling. Daling. Emotions are powerful. They can surge through us like waves, unexpected and overwhelming. A single comment, a sudden memory, or a stressful moment can ignite a fire of fear, anger, shame, or sadness. In those moments, we often feel like passengers, trapped in the intensity, unable to see clearly or steer our way through. But what if there were a simple way to reclaim the wheel? A small, quiet act that begins to ease the tension, not by fighting the emotion, but by naming it. This is the power of affect labeling, a practice as simple as it is profound. It involves putting your feelings into words. That's it. Naming what you're feeling. Saying silently or aloud, I'm angry, or I feel scared, or this is sadness. It may sound too easy to matter, but neuroscience tells a different story. Studies show that when we name our emotions, the brain's threat center, the amygdala, begins to quiet down, and activity shifts toward the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for reasoning, language, and reflection. In short, naming an emotion helps calm the emotion. This concept has roots in mindfulness, therapy, and ancient contemplative practices, but only recently has science begun to explain why it works. In one experiment, participants were shown disturbing images while their brain activity was monitored. Those who labeled their emotional responses, saying I feel disgust or this makes me anxious, had reduced activity in the emotional centers of the brain, compared to those who didn't label what they felt. The act of naming shifted their experience. The emotional wave didn't vanish, but it softened. Another study involved people with intense phobias. They were asked to approach something they feared, like a spider. Those who simply acknowledged their fear by saying, I'm afraid, my heart is racing, were able to get closer to the spider in later exposures than those who avoided naming their feelings. Again, the naming made the emotion less overwhelming. It created a psychological distance, not of denial, but of understanding. They were no longer consumed by fear. They were observing it, and observation changes everything. Affect labeling is sometimes called name it to tame it, and the phrase is more than a rhyme, it's a strategy. When we feel emotional pain, we often resist it, we suppress it, or we drown in it. But naming offers a third path. It acknowledges the feeling without being overrun by it. It's a way of saying, this is happening. I see it. I accept it. And now I can respond. That small step creates space. And in that space, the mind regains clarity. Let's say you're anxious before a meeting. Your heart is racing. Your thoughts are spiraling. You might not even realize how tense you are. But then you pause. You take a breath. And you say, this is anxiety about wanting to perform well. Just those few words can shift your state. You've moved from being lost in the emotion to standing beside it. You're no longer inside the wave. You're watching it come in. And when you can see it, you can surf it, guide it, even ride it to something deeper. This is what affect labeling offers, a doorway into emotional clarity, a way of bringing the subconscious into the light of conscious language. You can use this technique in moments of stress, conflict, shame, or confusion. You simply pause and describe your feeling like an observer. I feel hurt. This is frustration. There's sadness here. You don't have to analyze it. You don't need to fix it. You just name it, and in doing so, you reduce its grip. And the effects ripple out. When you name your emotions, you become less reactive. You speak more thoughtfully. You make wiser choices. You become better at communicating with others because you're more attuned to your inner world. Instead of snapping, withdrawing, or masking, you can say what's real. And that realness builds trust with yourself and with those around you. This technique also helps in long-term emotional health. When we habitually avoid or suppress our emotions, they often resurface as tension, fatigue, or even illness. But when we give them names, we give them air. We let them breathe. And in that breath, healing begins. It's not about dramatizing our feelings. It's about acknowledging them, giving them just enough attention to be felt, understood, and released. Affect labeling can also be used preventively. You don't have to wait until the emotion is overwhelming. You can check in with yourself throughout the day. Ask, what am I feeling right now? Maybe the answer is tired, or a little lonely, or excited but nervous. Each label is a mirror, and the more often you look in that mirror, the better you understand yourself. You build emotional literacy. You start to recognize patterns. You see what situations spark what responses. And with that awareness, you gain power, not to control your emotions, but to live with them wisely. This skill can be taught to children too. Teaching a child to name their feelings, I'm mad or I'm scared, helps them manage emotions before they turn into tantrums or shutdowns. It gives them tools, words, confidence, and it sets the foundation for emotional intelligence in adulthood. When a child learns to say, I feel left out, instead of acting out, they're not just communicating, they're growing. In relationships, this technique is transformative. Think of how different a conversation feels when someone says, I'm feeling defensive right now, instead of becoming cold or combative. Or when a partner says, I think I'm feeling hurt, instead of lashing out. Naming emotions disarms tension. It invites honesty. It makes room for empathy. Because once an emotion is named, it's no longer hiding. It's no longer weaponized. It's shared. And shared emotions are easier to hold. But affect labeling is not about labeling every fleeting feeling or becoming hyper-focused on emotion. It's not about living in your head. It's about gentle awareness. It's a tool, not a trap. And like all tools, it becomes more effective with practice. At first, the words might feel clumsy. You might struggle to name what you feel. That's okay. Even saying, I don't know what I'm feeling is a form of labeling. It opens the door. And with time, you'll become more fluent in your emotional language. You might notice patterns. For example, a tightness in your chest that often accompanies anxiety, a heaviness that signals sadness, an edge in your voice that means frustration is nearby. When you name these things early, you can act early. You can make adjustments, set boundaries, take breaks. Speak with kindness. You're not waiting for the wave to crash. You're watching the tide roll in and deciding how to meet it. Affect labeling also teaches you something else. Emotions are not enemies. They are messengers. And messengers don't need to be silenced. They need to be understood. When you name a feeling, you give that messenger a seat at the table. You let it speak briefly. You hear what it has to say. And then, like all messages, it passes. You don't become the emotion. You learn from it. So next time you feel overwhelmed, pause, take a breath, and name what's there. This is sadness. This is fear. This is irritation. Say it like you would to a friend, gently, calmly, without judgment. You'll likely notice that the feeling shifts. It may not disappear, but it will soften. Because you've stopped running from it. You've looked it in the eye. And in that simple act, you've reclaimed your power. Naming emotions doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. It doesn't make you emotional. It makes you emotionally intelligent. You learn to feel without drowning. to think while still honoring your heart, to move through life with a kind of internal steadiness, a knowing that no matter what arises, you can face it, name it, and find your way forward. Implementation intentions. We often set goals with the best of intentions. We tell ourselves, I'm going to exercise more, or I need to stop procrastinating, or I want to eat healthier. The desire is real. The motivation might even be strong. But when the moment arrives, the alarm goes off early. The snacks appear at a party. The assignment sits untouched at 8 p.m. We hesitate. We rethink. We delay. And more often than we'd like, we fall short. Not because we're weak, but because good intentions alone are rarely enough. What we need often is a plan for the moment when motivation fades. A small mental structure that kicks in automatically when the situation calls for it. This is the quiet power of implementation intentions. An implementation intention is more than a vague goal. It's a specific, actionable plan that follows the structure. If X happens, then I will do Y. It takes the guesswork out of decisions by linking your desired behavior to a clear trigger, an event, a time, a feeling, or a place. Instead of saying, I want to read more, you say, if it's 9 p.m. and I'm home, then I will read for 20 minutes before bed. Instead of, I want to eat healthier, you decide, if I go out to lunch, then I'll order something grilled instead of fried. The idea is simple, but the results are profound. Psychologist Peter Gollwitzer, who introduced this concept, found that people who used implementation intentions were dramatically more successful at reaching their goals. Across dozens of studies and thousands of participants, the pattern held. Whether the goal was exercising, quitting smoking, improving productivity, or reducing anxiety, people who made if-then plans were more likely to follow through. Why? Because the brain is a creature of patterns. When we link an action to a specific cue, we're training the mind to respond automatically, like a reflex. The decision gets made before the temptation or distraction arrives. This technique is especially powerful for people who struggle with procrastination. We often delay not because we don't care, but because we get stuck in micro-decisions. Should I start now or later? Should I do this or that? Maybe just 5 more minutes, but when you've pre-decided, if it's 8 p.m., then I start my homework, you remove the negotiation. You take the moment of weakness out of the equation. The brain sees the cue and runs the script. You don't need to wrestle with willpower, because the decision has already been made. Implementation intentions also help with emotional triggers. For instance, if you're trying to stay calm in high-stress situations, you might create a plan like, if I feel myself getting angry during a meeting, then I will take 3 deep breaths before responding. That small pause can prevent words you later regret. Or, if I feel anxious before presenting, then I will remind myself I've prepared well. These are not just coping mechanisms, they are mental preludes for moments when our emotions might otherwise take the wheel. And that's the real magic. These plans prepare you for the hard moments before they arrive. You visualize the situation, you name the challenge, and you decide, calmly and clearly, how you'll respond. This isn't just about discipline. It's about designing your mind to succeed under pressure. It's about treating your future self with respect, by giving them a clear, helpful path instead of leaving them stranded in a stressful decision. Let's take a closer look at how this works in everyday life. Imagine you want to start running. Instead of saying, I'll try to run a few times this week, you set a cue and response. If it's 7 a.m., on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then I will put on my running shoes and go for a 30-minute jog. Now you're not relying on motivation. You're building a habit. You've carved a path in your brain that says, when this cue appears, this is what happens. And the more often you follow it, the smoother that path becomes. Eventually, it becomes routine, no drama, no hesitation, just motion. It's the same with breaking bad habits. Let's say you're trying to reduce mindless snacking. You could form a plan like, if I feel the urge to snack between meals, then I will drink a glass of water and wait 10 minutes. That pause, built into your plan, gives your mind space. It interrupts the automatic behavior. Over time, that space grows stronger and the urge weakens, because you're not just reacting, you're responding with a plan. The beauty of implementation intentions is that they work quietly. You don't need to think about them constantly. Once you've built them into your day, they sit in the background, waiting for their cue. They reduce decision fatigue. They protect you from your own distractions. They give structure to moments that might otherwise dissolve into chaos. And they do this, not by force, but by preparation. You can use this technique for almost any area of life: fitness, productivity, relationships, health, creativity. I want to write more. If I finish dinner, then I will write for 30 minutes. Want to improve your focus? If I sit down to work, then I will put my phone in another room. Want to be more grateful? If I get into bed, then I will list 3 things I appreciated today. Each plan is like a small lighthouse. It shines when the moment arrives, guiding your next step. You're never lost. You know what to do. Implementation intentions are especially helpful when paired with identity-based goals. For example, instead of just saying, "I want to meditate," you say, "If it's 7:30 a.m., then I will meditate for 10 minutes, because I'm the kind of person who begins the day with mindfulness." This aligns the behavior with your identity, and when your actions match your identity, your motivation deepens. You're no longer doing something just to achieve an outcome. You're doing it because it's who you are becoming. There's also a sense of gentle accountability in this practice. When you make a specific plan, you're making a small promise to yourself, and when you follow through, even in a tiny way, you build trust. You prove that your word matters, that you can rely on yourself. That's a quiet form of self-respect. And the more of those promises you keep, the stronger that respect becomes. This is not about being perfect. It's about being consistent, about giving your future self a fighting chance. But like all tools, implementation intentions require clarity. Vague goals create vague outcomes. Saying, "If I have free time, then I'll be productive," is too open-ended. What counts as free time? What counts as productive? But saying, "If I finish dinner and have 30 minutes, then I'll review tomorrow's calendar and answer 2 emails," gives your brain a clear signal. It removes ambiguity. And in moments of fatigue or distraction, clarity is everything. You can also build these plans around temptations. If I scroll on social media for 15 minutes, then I will stop and stretch for 5. This balances indulgence with awareness. It creates rhythm, not rigidity. Or for social habits, if I arrive at the party and feel shy, then I'll start a conversation by asking someone how they know the host. These small cues prepare you to act with intention, rather than retreating into old patterns. Over time, these if-then plans begin to shape your life. They become the rails that guide your habits, the soft code that runs in the background of your day. And because they're based on real moments and clear actions, they work even when motivation is low. Especially when motivation is low. Because in those moments we don't need more willpower. We need fewer decisions. We need the road already drawn. So the next time you set a goal, don't just say what you want. Say when and where it will happen. Say what you'll do when temptation arises. Say how you'll respond when emotion surges. Say, "If X, then I will Y." And write it down. Visualize it. Repeat it until the cue and the action feel linked. You're not just making a plan. You're building a pattern, one that leads quietly and steadily to the life you want. Mental contrasting method. We all carry dreams inside us. Visions of a better version of ourselves. Maybe it's writing a book, learning a language, building a business, or simply living with more clarity and calm. These wishes live in the quiet space between where we are and where we hope to be. And yet, for many of us, these dreams remain dreams, floating just out of reach. Not because we don't care, but because something's missing. A bridge between desire and action, between visualizing the goal and actually moving toward it. That bridge is built through a technique called mental contrasting, and its most powerful version? A method known simply as WOOP. WOOP stands for Wish, Outcome, Obstacle, Plan. It's a simple but surprisingly deep tool developed by psychologist Gabriel Ettingen, grounded in years of research on motivation and behavior change. Unlike pure positive thinking, which can sometimes backfire by making us feel prematurely satisfied, mental contrasting brings reality into the picture. It invites us to dream, and then asks us to confront what might get in the way. This contrast, this dynamic tension between hope and hurdle, turns wishful thinking into fuel for action. It doesn't kill the dream. It prepares the dream to live. Let's walk through the 4 parts of the WOOP method. It starts with the wish. What do you want? This is the seed of your motivation. It could be something big like getting in shape or starting a new career, or something small but meaningful like going to bed earlier, meditating daily, or being more patient with your children. The key is to choose a wish that feels challenging, but also realistic. Something you deeply care about, something that matters now. Next comes the outcome. This is where you visualize success. Picture it vividly. Feel the benefits of reaching your goal. What will it look like, sound like, feel like? If your wish is to write a book, imagine holding the finished copy in your hands. Imagine the pride, the sense of completion, the joy of having created something real. This step taps into your emotional core. It reminds you why the wish is worth pursuing. It makes the goal feel alive. Then comes the heart of the method, the obstacle. This is the contrast, the part that many people skip over in traditional goal setting. Here you ask yourself, what's really standing in the way? Not in the world, but within you. What internal habit, thought, or circumstance could block your progress? If your goal is to exercise every morning, maybe the obstacle is that you tend to hit snooze and stay in bed. If your wish is to eat healthier, maybe the obstacle is that you eat late at night. This isn't about blaming yourself. It's about naming the friction, because once it's named, it can be worked with. And that leads us to the final step, the plan. This is where the magic of mental contrasting becomes action. You create a specific implementation intention. If obstacle X arises, then I will do Y. If I feel too tired in the morning to run, then I will remind myself that 10 minutes is enough to start. If I get the urge to procrastinate, then I'll set a timer for just 5 focused minutes. The plan links your obstacle to a concrete response. It transforms resistance into readiness, and it does so gently, practically, effectively. The genius of WOOP is its balance. It doesn't tell you to be blindly optimistic, nor does it dwell in pessimism. It holds both, the vision and the barrier, in one clear mental space, and that space becomes a workshop for your motivation. You're not just dreaming, you're preparing. You're anticipating challenge not with dread, but with a plan. And when the challenge comes, you're not surprised. You've already rehearsed your response. This method has been tested in settings as diverse as schools, hospitals, prisons, and corporate offices. The findings are consistent. People who use WOOP are more likely to follow through on their goals. They procrastinate less. They perform better under pressure. They make smarter decisions. Because they're not relying on willpower alone. They've trained their mind to expect the moment of resistance and to meet it with clarity. Let's go back to our earlier example. Your wish is to write a book. The outcome is the pride you'll feel holding that book. The obstacle is mental fatigue after a long workday. And the plan. If it's 9 p.m. on weekdays and I feel tired, then I will write for 30 minutes instead of watching TV. This plan doesn't fight your fatigue, it works around it. It meets you where you are. And by making that small step automatic, you turn it into a habit. You chip away at the resistance, one evening at a time. And before long, you're not just someone who wants to write. You're someone who is writing. You can use WOOP in nearly any area of life. Want to be more present with your family? Wish, I want to be more attentive during dinner. Outcome, I'll feel more connected and less distracted. Obstacle, I usually check my phone out of habit. Plan, if I sit down for dinner, then I will put my phone in another room. Small change. Big shift. Or maybe you want to drink more water. Wish, I want to stay hydrated. Outcome, I'll feel clearer and more energized. Obstacle, I forget during the day. Plan, if I finish a meeting, then I'll drink a glass of water. Again, the key is in scale. It's specificity. It's anchoring your dream to something real. And this method doesn't just help with action, it helps with emotional resilience. Imagine you wish to stay calm in conflict. The outcome might be avoiding regret and maintaining connection. The obstacle, you tend to react impulsively when you feel misunderstood. So the plan becomes, if I feel that rising heat in my chest, then I will pause and take 3 breaths before speaking. You're training your nervous system to respond, not react. You're replacing instinct with intention. WOOP also sidesteps a common trap in self-improvement, the fantasy loop. When we visualize success without grounding it in reality, our brains can become complacent. We feel a brief emotional reward, as if we've already achieved a goal. But without contrast, that image doesn't translate into action. Mental contrasting fixes this. It keeps the dream vivid and brings in the reality check. It keeps you honest. And in doing so, it strengthens your commitment. Another quiet benefit of WOOP is that it invites self-awareness. When you ask, what's really standing in my way, you begin to see your patterns. You recognize recurring obstacles. You learn how your mind avoids delays, distracts. But instead of judging yourself, you use that insight. You plan around it. You design your environment and routines with more compassion. You stop expecting perfection and start engineering progress. And best of all, WOOP is fast. You don't need an hour-long journaling session or a deep meditation retreat. Just a few minutes of clear thought. A quiet pause in the morning. A moment of reflection before a big task. You can do it in your head or jot it down on paper. The format is always the same. Wish, outcome, obstacle, plan. Simple, repeatable, profound. So, if there's something in your life you've been wanting to change, start here. Don't just wish. Don't just visualize, contrast. Plan. Act. Use the WOOP method as a gentle structure, a quiet guide. A bridge between the you of today and the you you're becoming. Because goals aren't achieved by dreaming alone. They're achieved by walking with the dream in one hand and a plan in the other. Commitment devices. There are moments when we feel strong, focused, determined, clear about what we want. We set goals, make promises, and feel completely sure we'll follow through. But time passes. Temptation arrives. Energy fades. And suddenly, the very commitment we made with confidence now feels like a burden. We begin to bargain, to justify, to stray. This gap between our present intentions and our future actions is part of being human. But what if there were a way to bridge that gap? A strategy that lets your strongest self make decisions before your weaker moments arrive? That strategy is called a commitment device, a modern version of the ancient Ulysses Pact. The term comes from the myth of Ulysses, or Odysseus, the clever hero of Homer's Odyssey. On his voyage home, Ulysses knew he would soon encounter the sirens, creatures whose enchanting song lured sailors to their doom. He understood that in the moment he would be powerless to resist, so he devised a plan. He instructed his crew to plug their ears with wax and tie him tightly to the mast of the ship. No matter how much he screamed or begged, they were not to release him. And so, when the sirens sang, he was captivated, but safe. His future weakness had been anticipated by his present wisdom. This myth lives on in modern psychology as one of the most powerful tools for self-control. A commitment device is anything you do now to make sure your future self follows through. It's a form of pre-commitment, a way of protecting your goals by making it harder to abandon them later. You reduce your future freedom on purpose, not out of punishment, but out of protection, because you know that when temptation strikes, your present logic might not be available, so you set things up in advance. you tie yourself to the mast. Commitment devices come in many forms. One of the simplest is changing your environment to remove easy access to temptation. If you're trying to eat healthier, you don't rely on willpower at midnight, you simply don't keep junk food in the house. If you want to wake up early, you put your alarm clock across the room, forcing yourself to get out of bed to silence it. If you want to focus, you install website blockers or turn off notifications. These are small adjustments that add friction to the wrong behavior and flow to the right one. They don't guarantee discipline, but they make discipline easier. Then there are financial commitment devices. Let's say you want to write a certain number of pages this week. You give a friend $100 and say, "If I don't meet my goal, donate this money to a cause I dislike." The potential pain of loss becomes a motivator. Suddenly, the cost of quitting is real. And your present self, who values the goal, has made it harder for your future self to wiggle out. It may sound harsh, but studies show this kind of upfront accountability significantly increases follow-through, not because you want to suffer, but because you want to avoid regret. Other commitment devices rely on social pressure. You make your goals public. You promise a friend, a coach, a group that you'll show up. Complete the task, stick to the schedule. Now your future failure wouldn't just be private, it would be visible. And that visibility often strengthens resolve. When people know others are watching, they tend to rise to the occasion. Not out of shame, but out of shared purpose. That external accountability becomes an anchor. It keeps you steady when inner motivation wavers. And then there are digital tools, apps that lock you out of your phone for a set time, platforms that penalize you financially if you don't log activity, or services that let you bet on your behavior. These might seem extreme, but for many people they work precisely because they eliminate decision fatigue. You don't have to argue with yourself at 7 p.m. about whether to go to the gym. You've already made the decision yesterday, and you've designed your world in a way that helps you stick to it. But the beauty of commitment devices isn't just in their cleverness, it's in their humility. They start with an honest admission: my future self may not be as disciplined as I hope. And instead of pretending otherwise, they plan accordingly. They say, let me support my future self now. Let me remove the burden of choice later. Let me act with foresight, not just willpower. This kind of self-compassion is deeply practical. It's not about distrusting yourself. It's about designing for your full humanity. Because the truth is, our future selves are often tired, distracted, emotional, and that's okay. Commitment devices aren't there to punish that version of you. They're there to guide them, to steer them away from the rocks when the sirens sing, to hold the vision when the moment is hard. They are tools of love, not control. And they're not just for breaking bad habits, they're just as powerful for building good ones. I want to learn a new skill? Schedule a weekly lesson with someone who will notice if you skip. I want to write more? Block out sacred, untouchable hours on your calendar and make it hard to schedule over them. I want to spend less time on your phone. Leave it in another room while you work. Each of these is a small pact, a signal to your brain: this matters. I'm committed. I've made it harder to break my word. Some commitment devices are even internal. They live in the mind. You might write a contract to yourself, or record a voice memo with your reasons for change and listen to it during moments of weakness, or make a vision board that reminds you daily what you're working toward. These may not tie you to the mast, but they keep your eyes on the stars. The key to any commitment device is that it must be voluntary. You choose it. You create it. You agree to it in advance, when you're calm and clear. That's what makes it different from restriction. It's self-created structure, a boundary that protects your deeper goals from your passing impulses. And that's the paradox of freedom. We often think that more freedom means better outcomes, but sometimes we thrive with less when we narrow our options not out of fear, but out of purpose. When we say, I don't want to decide in the moment. I want to decide now while I'm aligned with my values. That's not control. That's wisdom. The best commitment devices are simple. A gym bag packed the night before. a prepaid course that keeps you accountable, a friend waiting at the trailhead, a to-do list placed front and center, a rule like no screens until I journal for 5 minutes. None of these are heroic, but all of them are effective because they work not by fighting your future self, but by helping them succeed. You don't need to be flawless. You just need to be strategic. You don't need to be hyper-disciplined. You just need to build a few well-placed constraints. Because in the end, we all face moments when our energy dips, our mood shifts, our focus wanders. And in those moments, the best gift we can receive is a structure we created when we were strong. So ask yourself, what do I really want to change? And then ask, how can I make that change easier to stick to, especially when I won't feel like it? What's my version of the mast? What friction can I add to the bad habit? What support can I build for the good one? Commitment devices are not about being harder on yourself. They're about being smarter for yourself. They're reminders that you care, that you're planning ahead, that you believe in your ability to change, and you're setting up the conditions to make that change last. Because sometimes the best way to be free is to tie yourself to the right things. The Midas touch, subtle touch to influence. There are few things as quietly powerful as human touch. A brief hand on the shoulder, a light tap on the arm, a simple moment of contact so small that it's often not even consciously noticed. And yet, research shows that this kind of subtle touch can influence behavior in profound ways. It can increase generosity, agreement, cooperation, and even affection. This invisible form of persuasion has been called the Midas touch. But unlike the myth of King Midas, who turned everything to gold, this touch transforms not objects but interactions. It builds connection. And when used with care, it can be one of the most gentle and effective tools for shaping how others feel and respond. The Midas touch effect has been studied in restaurants, stores, classrooms, and even on the street. In one famous experiment, waitresses who briefly touched customers on the arm while taking their order consistently received higher tips than those who didn't. The touch was light, appropriate, and brief, just 1 or 2 seconds, and yet it made a measurable difference. Why? Because touch is a powerful signal. Even when we're not aware of it, our bodies interpret it as a cue for trust, familiarity, and openness. It says you're safe, we're connected, you can respond kindly. The effect isn't limited to tipping. In another study, researchers approached strangers and asked them to sign a petition. Those who were gently touched on the upper arm while being asked were significantly more likely to agree than those who weren't. The same pattern emerged in social settings. People were more likely to dance, engage, or share contact information when approached with a friendly, non-intrusive touch. Again and again, the message was clear: touch, when done well, builds subtle rapport. It creates a micro moment of warmth that can tip the scale toward yes. But here's the key: it must be natural, respectful, and brief. The effectiveness of the Midas touch comes from its subtlety. Anything longer than a second or two can feel invasive. Anything too intense or directed at the wrong part of the body can break trust instead of building it. The most effective version is often a gentle touch on the upper arm or shoulder. It's the kind of gesture you might naturally use when expressing agreement, encouragement, or gratitude. When timed right, it feels like an extension of your words, a nonverbal "I see you," or "we're in this together." Touch has such power because it taps into something primal. Long before we spoke, we communicated through physical contact. A hug, a pat, a hand on the back. These gestures calm the nervous system. They release oxytocin, the bonding hormone. They reduce cortisol, the stress hormone. Even today, in a world of screens and schedules, we remain wired for touch. And while many modern interactions are purely verbal or digital, that single moment of physical connection can cut through noise and build trust almost instantly. In counseling or therapy, trained professionals sometimes use this tool to ground clients, to signal presence and support. A hand on the shoulder during a breakthrough moment, A reassuring touch as someone shares something difficult. These touches aren't just gestures, they're anchors. They communicate without words. You're not alone. In sales or negotiation, a similar principle applies. A handshake, a tap as you hand someone a document, these moments soften the interaction. They introduce warmth into what might otherwise feel cold or transactional. Of course, the context and relationship matter deeply. A touch that feels natural in one culture or setting might feel inappropriate in another. In professional environments, personal boundaries must be honored. Consent, even if unspoken, should always be felt. The goal of the Midas touch is never to manipulate, but to connect. It's not about power. It's about presence. When done with genuine care, it can bring people closer, not through force, but through felt safety. Even in romantic contexts, subtle touch has been shown to influence attraction. In one study, men who gently touched a woman's arm while introducing themselves were more likely to receive a phone number than those who didn't. The touch wasn't aggressive or flirtatious, it was confident, grounded, respectful. It communicated ease, and ease is attractive. It says, "I'm comfortable here, you can be too." That kind of silent confidence often speaks louder than words. But the Midas touch isn't just for influencing others. It can also be used to reassure and regulate yourself. Placing your own hand over your heart, gently massaging your own shoulders, wrapping your arms in a self-hug during moments of anxiety. These small, physical gestures have been shown to calm the nervous system. They remind the body of safety. And when we feel safe, we think more clearly, speak more authentically, and connect more deeply. There's a reason mindfulness practices sometimes include touch. Pressing fingers together, resting a palm on the stomach to feel each breath. These anchors pull awareness into the present. And in the same way, the Midas touch, when given or received, can bring a person into a more receptive state. A state where persuasion isn't about convincing, but aligning. Where influence comes not from pushing, but from shared grounding. In day-to-day life, you might begin to notice the natural openings for this kind of contact. When offering encouragement to a coworker, when thanking a server, when comforting a friend. These small, appropriate touches create tiny windows of emotional resonance. They signal sincerity. They bypass layers of skepticism. And they remind people, on a biological level, that they are not alone. It's also worth noting that you don't always need touch to create the effect of touch. Tone of voice, eye contact, warmth in your words. These can mimic the emotional impact of physical connection. But when used with care, actual touch amplifies those signals. It adds depth, it enhances trust, and it makes a moment more memorable. Still, the power of touch can be misused. When forced, faked, or used manipulatively, it creates discomfort. It triggers defense, not openness. That's why the foundation must always be empathy, respect, and timing. The best touch is never the focus of the interaction. It's the subtle underscore. It's there and gone. And yet, it lingers in the feeling it leaves behind. The Midas touch reminds us that we are not just minds talking to minds. We are bodies, too, sensitive, responsive, attuned to the smallest cues. A single second of genuine connection through touch can shift how a person feels, remembers, and responds. It's not magic. It's neuroscience. But it feels like warmth. So the next time you're speaking to someone and feel a moment of resonance, consider whether a gentle touch might deepen that connection. A light tap on the arm as you share good news. A supportive pat when someone expresses worry. A brief hand on the shoulder when offering encouragement. These gestures, though fleeting, speak volumes. And perhaps, more importantly, be mindful of how you touch yourself. When you place a hand on your heart and say, "You're okay," or gently rub your neck after a long day, you're telling your nervous system, "We're safe. We're cared for." These moments, though small, add up. They teach the body and the mind that connection begins here. The Midas touch is not about changing others. It's about creating closeness. It's about the tiny, invisible ways we tell each other, "You matter." In a world that often rushes past the human element, this kind of quiet influence can be more powerful than persuasion. It can be healing. Primacy, recency effects. In the theater of the mind, not all moments are equal. Some leave echoes long after they've passed. Some fade into silence before they're even noticed. And curiously, the parts we remember best, the parts that shape our impressions, our decisions, and our memories, are often the very beginning and the very end. This is the essence of two of the most powerful principles in psychology, the Primacy Effect and the Recency Effect. Together, they reveal something deeply important about attention, persuasion, and memory, that timing, more than quantity, often determines what we remember and what persuades us. The Primacy Effect is simple. Information presented first in a sequence tends to be remembered more vividly and carries more weight. When we hear a speech, meet someone new, or open a book, those initial moments set the tone. They create expectations. They form the framework through which everything else is judged. In debates and courtroom trials, the side that speaks first can often plant ideas that linger, subtly shaping how later arguments are interpreted. First impressions matter, and not just in personal interactions, but in how we process ideas. Then comes the recency effect. This tells us that the last thing we hear or see also carries special weight. It's the freshest in our minds. It hasn't had time to fade. It feels immediate, relevant, close. In situations where there's a delay between learning and judgment, like hearing two sales pitches with a pause in between, the last one heard often sticks more firmly. We might forget the middle, but we remember how things ended. The last word, the final note, the lingering thought. Together, primacy and recency create a kind of mental spotlight. They illuminate the opening and the closing, while the middle often lies in shadow. This has powerful implications, especially in fields like communication, persuasion, education, and even habit formation. It suggests that how you start and how you end can matter more than everything in between. You might say 10 things, but people are likely to remember the first one and the last one, and what they remember shapes how they feel. Take public speaking, for instance. Great speakers know the importance of a strong opening, something that grabs attention, sets the tone, and creates curiosity. This isn't just stylistic, it's strategic. That first impression becomes the lens through which the rest of the talk is experienced. And equally important is the closing, the final message, the key takeaway, the lasting emotion. A strong ending can reframe everything that came before it. It ties the bow. It leaves a signature in the mind. Salespeople, too, use these effects deliberately. They lead with the most attractive benefit, the headline, the core promise. That's primacy at work. Then, as the conversation winds down, they circle back to the key points or save a compelling bonus for last. That's recency. By anchoring both ends of the conversation with high-impact moments, they increase the chances that the message will stick and sway. But these effects aren't just useful in persuasion, they're essential in learning and self-improvement. Think about how you study. If you read a long list or sit through an hour-long lecture, your brain naturally remembers the beginning and the end better than the middle. This is why breaking study sessions into smaller chunks, known as chunking, is so effective. Each chunk has its own start and finish. And by doing so, you multiply the number of primacy and recency moments your brain can hold on to. This technique works for memorizing speeches, preparing for exams, even forming habits. Instead of trying to grind through a single block of effort, you create structured mini-sessions, each one with its own fresh beginning and satisfying end. This not only enhances retention, but also increases motivation. The mind responds to rhythm, and beginnings and endings are part of that rhythm. Even in list making, the effects are present. Studies show that when people are given a list, say, a to-do list or a pros and cons chart, they tend to recall and focus on the first few and the last few items. So if you're writing down goals or trying to influence a decision, be strategic. Place the most important items at the top or bottom. If you're drafting an email or making a pitch, lead with value and close with clarity. Let the structure itself support the message. In relationships, the same pattern holds. First impressions create emotional anchors. Whether it's a first date, a job interview, or a new friendship, those early moments are disproportionately influential, and how interactions end, whether with warmth or coldness, understanding or frustration, shapes how they're remembered. The end of a conversation, a trip, or a shared experience often leaves a stronger impression than the details within. It's not just about what happens, it's about how it starts and how it ends. Psychologists have also found that these effects influence not just memory but judgment. The first arguments we hear often shape how we interpret later information. This is especially true in situations with limited time or high emotional stakes. In such cases, the mind clings to what it encounters first and last. The middle fades or is filtered through the lens already formed. This is why framing matters, why the order of information is not just cosmetic but cognitive. In marketing, this principle is used in product displays and advertisements. The first feature listed on a product label is often the most appealing. The final benefit mentioned in a pitch is often what lingers. In branding, companies know that the way a customer is welcomed and the way they are sent off has a greater emotional impact than the service itself. The greeting and the goodbye, the introduction and the conclusion. These are the bookends of experience, and they often determine how the whole experience is judged. But perhaps the most personal application of the primacy and recency effects is in daily self-talk. What are the first thoughts you feed yourself in the morning? What are the last words you speak to yourself at night? These beginnings and endings become the dominant notes in your mental music. They set the emotional tone. They prime your mood, your motivation, and even your confidence. By starting your day with intention and ending it with reflection, you create memory anchors that shape your days more than you might realize. If you journal, consider opening your entry with a strong affirmation or a clear intention, and close with gratitude or insight. If you're giving feedback to someone, begin with care and clarity and end with encouragement. Even when teaching a lesson or telling a story, these effects are your allies. Start strong, end stronger, and let the middle be supported by the weight of those two poles. There's also something hopeful in this. We don't need to be perfect all the way through. People are more likely to remember how we made them feel at the start and how we made them feel at the end. That means we can focus our energy there, be present there, invest attention there. It means that even if the middle was messy, there's still time to leave a beautiful final note. So whether you're preparing a presentation, having a meaningful conversation, organizing your study time, or shaping your own habits of thought, remember the power of timing. Remember that your mind and the minds of others hold on to what comes first and what comes last. And between those two moments lies the space where understanding grows. Because in the end, how you begin and how you finish might be the most persuasive things you ever say. Misattribution of Arousal. Arousal. Sometimes the heart races, the palms sweat, the breath quickens. You feel something stirring, urgency, alertness, even excitement. And in that moment, the mind searches for meaning. It asks, what's causing this? And often, without realizing it, we answer the question incorrectly. We assume we're excited about the person we're talking to. We think we're anxious because of a particular event, but in truth, the body may have been aroused for a completely different reason: fatigue, fear, or even physical activity. This common confusion between cause and effect is known in psychology as the misattribution of arousal. The term refers to a powerful quirk in human perception. It happens when we mistake the source of our physiological arousal, like increased heart rate or adrenaline, for something more immediately present or emotionally appealing. In essence, the body feels activated, and the brain attributes that activation to whatever is nearby. It's a shortcut, and like many shortcuts, it's useful, but prone to error. And those errors can deeply influence how we form connections, make decisions, and respond to persuasion. The most famous demonstration of this phenomenon came in the form of an experiment often referred to as the shaky bridge study. In this classic setup, male participants were approached by an attractive female experimenter while standing on a suspension bridge that swayed and shook above a deep canyon. A second group of men were approached by the same woman, but on a solid, stable bridge with no fear factor involved. After the interaction, the woman gave both groups her number and invited them to call if they had further questions. The results? Men who met her on the shaky bridge were significantly more likely to call. Why? Their bodies had been flooded with adrenaline from the height and instability, but they subconsciously misattributed those physical signals to the woman. Their pounding hearts, sweaty palms, and heightened awareness felt like attraction. And so, they followed that feeling. They believed they felt a spark. But it wasn't necessarily love, it was adrenaline. Misread. Redirected. Misattributed. This finding reveals something fascinating about how humans process emotion. We often rely on the body to tell us what we feel. When something elevates our physiological state, be it danger, novelty, motion, or anticipation, the mind attempts to explain it. And because it's difficult to trace subtle internal signals back to their true source, we often attach the feeling to whatever or whoever is right in front of us. This is why thrill-seeking activities, like roller coasters, horror films, or competitive games, can intensify romantic or social chemistry. The excitement generated by the activity bleeds into the interaction. The heart says something is happening, and the mind replies, "It must be you." Persuaders and communicators can use this effect thoughtfully. If you're giving a presentation, for instance, creating a heightened emotional environment before delivering your key message can increase its impact. A burst of music, a surprising fact, a bit of movement or humor. These techniques elevate the audience's physiological state, making them more alert and engaged. When the message then arrives, it's received not in a neutral state, but in a primed one. And that energy becomes associated with you, with your idea, with your call to action. This principle is also used, often intuitively, in sales and marketing. Think of how a product is introduced with flair, a demonstration, a burst of enthusiasm, maybe even a countdown or a drumbeat. These elements aren't just decoration. They're tools for creating arousal, so that the eventual pitch feels more exciting, more urgent. The viewer's body gets energized, and the mind connects that energy with the offer. Even in storytelling, timing a key moment right after a suspenseful or emotional peak can make that point land more powerfully. The body is stirred, and the message sticks. But perhaps the most personal and transformative use of this principle is in self-regulation. Imagine you're nervous before a job interview. Your heart is racing. Your stomach is tight. Normally, you might label this as anxiety, and that label would feed your fear. But here's where misattribution becomes a tool. You can pause, breathe, and reframe. Instead of saying, "I'm anxious," say, "I'm excited." The body doesn't know the difference. Both emotions feel similar: fast heartbeat, alert mind, heightened energy. And by choosing to interpret it as excitement, you change your posture, your tone, your confidence. You've redirected the energy. You've reclaimed the moment. This is not self-deception. It's cognitive flexibility. Studies have shown that people who reframe anxiety as excitement perform better in stressful tasks. They speak more clearly. They take more risks. They feel more empowered. It's not because the nerves vanish. It's because the narrative changes. The same physiological arousal, now paired with a positive story, creates motivation instead of fear. This trick also works in situations like public speaking, sports, or even conflict resolution. When you feel the surge, don't try to suppress it. Don't fight the body. Instead, align the mind. Let the feeling fuel you. Let it sharpen your senses, strengthen your voice. Say to yourself, "This means I care. This means I'm ready. This is my body rising to the occasion." In relationships, misattribution can also deepen connection if you understand it. Shared activities that involve adrenaline or intensity can increase bonding. A first date at a theme park, a hike to a scenic overlook, a playful competition. These experiences stir the body, and the emotion gets anchored to the person beside you. The excitement of the situation is misread as chemistry, and sometimes that misreading becomes real, because feelings, once interpreted and reinforced, take on a life of their own. But this effect can also lead to confusion. Sometimes we believe we're drawn to someone when in fact, we're just overstimulated. Sometimes we think we hate something, when in truth, we're just physically uncomfortable. Misattribution can color our relationships, our fears, our attractions. That's why awareness matters. It's why pausing to ask, what's really causing this feeling, can help you navigate emotion with more clarity. When you understand misattribution of arousal, you gain two superpowers. First, you learn to design experiences more thoughtfully, for others and for yourself. You know that emotion can be shaped not just by content, but by context. Second, you learn to relabel your own reactions. You stop being a passive recipient of feelings and become an active interpreter. You realize that how you explain your arousal changes how it affects you. This principle also overlaps with techniques like power posing, short bursts of exercise, or breathwork. These practices activate the body, and if you enter them with intention, you can direct that activation into your next action. A few jumping jacks before a phone call, a walk around the block before a presentation, not to calm down but to stir up the body so that you arrive energized. Then you channel that energy. You attribute it not to fear, but to focus. And in doing so, you shift your state. In everyday life, misattribution happens more than we think. A song raises our heartbeat, and we feel more alive. A warm room makes us feel more connected to someone nearby. A flash of excitement from a near miss in traffic leaves us feeling more emotional than the moment warrants. The body is constantly sending signals, and the brain is constantly trying to make sense of them. The story we tell about those signals, that's the difference. So when you feel something big, pause. Ask, where is this coming from? Then ask, where do I want it to go? That moment of reflection can turn confusion into clarity. It can turn discomfort into drive. It can turn randomness into purpose. Misattribution of arousal teaches us a quiet truth. Our feelings are real, but their causes aren't always what we think. And by understanding that, we don't just become better persuaders, we become wiser navigators of our own emotional world. Default effect. Effect. In the silent architecture of choice, there is a hidden force that shapes human behavior far more than we realize. It doesn't shout or demand. It doesn't argue or persuade in the traditional sense. Instead, it simply waits, in the background of our decisions, guiding us not through effort, but through ease. This quiet force is called the default effect, and it reveals a deep truth about how we make choices. More often than not, we go with the option that's already been chosen for us. The default effect refers to the powerful tendency for people to stick with the preset option, the default, when faced with a decision. Whether out of inertia, trust, or simply convenience, we tend to accept the path that requires the least resistance. The effect is so reliable, so robust, that it's been used to shape everything from public health to retirement savings, from online behavior to daily habits. And it works not by removing freedom, but by making one option feel easier, more natural, more right. Let's start with one of the most famous examples, retirement enrollment. In countries where employees must actively opt in to join a retirement savings plan, participation rates are often low. People mean to enroll, but they delay, forget, or procrastinate. But when the same plan makes enrollment automatic, with the option to opt out, participation rates soar. Why? Nothing about the plan has changed, only the default. And that tiny shift, what happens if you do nothing, changes everything. The same pattern appears in organ donation policies. Countries with opt-in systems, where citizens must sign up to become donors, have relatively low donor rates. But in countries with opt-out systems, where everyone is a donor by default unless they choose otherwise, participation is dramatically higher. Again, the difference isn't values or culture, it's the default. People take the path that's already been paved for them. This principle is now used widely in behavioral economics, design, and public policy. It's called a nudge, a small shift in how choices are structured, intended to guide people toward better outcomes without taking away their freedom. Defaults are powerful nudges because they tap into something very human, the desire to conserve effort, to avoid complexity, to trust that if something is already chosen, maybe it's been chosen for a reason. In a way, defaults carry an implicit recommendation. If a website pre-checks a subscription box, users assume that it must be the normal choice. If a form comes pre-filled with an option, many leave it untouched. We see what's already selected and think, this must be what's best. Or, more often, we simply don't think about it at all. We move on. We accept. We continue. And this is why the default effect is such a potent tool in persuasion and behavior design. If you want someone to adopt a particular behavior or make a certain decision, don't just ask them to choose it. Make it the default. Let that option sit quietly in the background, ready, waiting, effortless. Give people the freedom to change it, but know that most won't. Because humans don't always decide by logic. We decide by friction, and whatever is easiest to do usually gets done. But this principle doesn't just apply in policy or software. It can be applied in your own life to change your habits, increase your focus, and design your environment for growth. Think about the decisions you face every day. What's the default when you wake up? What's the default when you sit down at your desk? What happens when you get home in the evening? Often these defaults are unconscious, but they're shaping your day, your mood, and your mind. Want to read more and scroll less? Make reading the default. Place a book on your pillow so it's the first thing you touch at night. Move social media apps off your home screen, or delete them entirely until you choose to reinstall. I want to eat healthier. Prep meals in advance so they're the default in your fridge. Remove junk food so the absence becomes the default. Want to journal more? Leave a notebook open on your kitchen table. Make the desired behavior one step closer, and the undesired one just a bit farther away. The key is to reduce friction on the good habits and add just a bit of friction to the ones you'd like to change. You're not forcing yourself. You're not banning anything. You're just shaping the path of least resistance. And over time, that path becomes the one you walk most often. Not out of willpower, but out of design. Even something as simple as your browser homepage can act as a default nudge. If the first thing you see when you open the internet is a news feed or social media, that becomes the mental gateway to your day. But if your homepage is a learning platform, a mindfulness reminder, or your personal goals, you've made a subtle shift. You've chosen a different default, and the brain, following the path it's given, often goes where it's nudged. In relationships, too, defaults shape connection. If your default is to check in once a week, that rhythm becomes the foundation. If your default is to text before sleeping, that small habit grows into emotional warmth. And when we change those defaults by distance, distraction, or delay, the connection fades, often without us realizing why. The truth is, most of our relationships are not built on grand gestures. They're built on default patterns, small, repeated acts of care or avoidance. So how do you use the default effect wisely? You start by becoming aware of your existing defaults. What's automatic in your day? What happens by default in your routines? Which behaviors are chosen because they're easy, not because they're meaningful? Then you gently adjust, not by overhauling your life overnight, but by presetting better options. For example, if you want to exercise more, lay out your clothes the night before. If you want to save more money, set up automatic transfers right after payday. If you want to drink more water, keep a full bottle in view at all times. If you want to write, set your writing software to open at startup. Each of these is a default, A small architectural tweak in your environment that says, this is what happens when nothing else gets in the way. And in a world full of distraction, those defaults matter more than we think. It's also important to recognize that not all defaults are neutral. Many are the result of someone else's design, companies, systems, institutions. A pre-check box that signs you up for marketing emails, an autoplay setting that keeps videos running, a purchase screen where the expensive bundle is selected by default. These defaults aren't always in your interest, but they still guide your behavior. That's why awareness is power. When you spot a default, you can ask, is this what I want? If not, you uncheck. You opt out. You reclaim choice. Because that's the paradox of the default effect. It influences us most when we're not aware of it. But once you notice it, you gain control. You can use it to build habits, to shape environments, to design choices that lead toward your values, not just your impulses. And maybe that's the deeper message of this principle. We often think change requires more effort, more motivation, more discipline, but often, what we really need is less friction, a better default, a softer path toward the life we're trying to build. So look around. Look within. What's the current default? And what would happen if you changed it? Feynman Technique. In a world filled with endless information, knowing something isn't enough. True mastery lies not in memorizing facts, but in understanding them so clearly that you can explain them with ease, not with jargon, not with complexity, but in simple, clear, human language. That's the heart of the Feynman Technique, a timeless learning method inspired by the legendary physicist Richard Feynman, often called the Great Explainer. And while it began in the world of science, its lessons extend far beyond. Feynman believed that the test of understanding is your ability to teach. If you can explain a concept in simple terms, without hiding behind big words or vague phrases, you probably understand it. And if you can't, you probably don't. It's that simple. The Feynman Technique gives you a structured way to reveal those gaps in understanding and then close them, one clear step at a time. It's not a hack or shortcut. It's a mirror, one that shows you what you really know and what you're just pretending to know. So how does it work? The process involves 4 simple steps, but within those steps lies a powerful mental workout, one that transforms the way you learn, think, and even persuade. Step 1. Choose a concept. It could be anything you want to learn. How photosynthesis works, what blockchain is, why inflation rises, or even how to make a persuasive argument. Pick something that matters to you. Something that's complex enough to challenge you, but useful enough to motivate you. Write the name of the concept at the top of a blank page, and prepare to engage not just with the content, but with your own mind. Step 2. Explain it as if you were teaching a child. This is the core of the Feynman Technique. You pretend you're teaching the idea to someone with no background knowledge, maybe a child, maybe a curious beginner. The rule is simple: use plain language only. No fancy terms, no shorthand, just clear, honest explanation. As you write or speak, you're forced to break the concept down into parts. You create analogies. You use everyday examples. You simplify not to dumb it down, but to sharpen your understanding. And here's where the magic happens. As you try to explain, you'll stumble. You'll reach for a word and realize you don't actually know what it means. You'll write a sentence and realize you've only repeated what you read, but not what you understand. These are your gaps. They're not failures. They're the most valuable part of the process. Step 3. Go back to the source. Relearn. Clarify. Now that you know where your understanding breaks down, return to the material. Read again. Watch again. But this time, you're not passively consuming. You're hunting. You're focused. You're looking for that one detail, that missing link, that unclear mechanism. Once you find it, integrate it into your explanation. Then try again. Rewrite. Retell. Each round sharpens the blade. You're not just reviewing, you're refining. This is what separates the Feynman technique from rote memorization. Memorizing gives you facts. Feynman's method gives you fluency, the ability to move through an idea from any direction, to see how the parts connect, to explain not just what it is, but why it works. Step 4. Simplify again. Make it elegant. Now that you've clarified the rough spots, your goal is to rewrite your explanation one more time, but better. Cleaner. Smother. Try to make it elegant. Could a 12-year-old understand? Could a curious stranger follow along? Remove unnecessary words. Remove clutter. Keep the core and make it shine. The result should be something that doesn't just show your understanding, but invites others to share in it. This final step is often where the real confidence comes from. You begin to speak and think in clear terms. The idea stops being something you borrowed from a book and becomes something you own. Something you could explain anytime, anywhere, without notes or slides. And that's when you know you didn't just study it, you learned it. The Feynman technique works because it leverages 3 deep truths about learning. First, clarity requires effort. It's easy to nod along when reading or watching a video, but explaining something forces the brain to actively retrieve, process, and reorganize knowledge. It turns passive input into active output. That active expression, whether verbal or written, is what solidifies memory and understanding. Second, simplicity reveals truth. If you can't explain something simply, you probably don't understand it well enough. Complex words often mask confusion. Simplicity, on the other hand, requires precision. You have to know exactly what you mean to say. And that precision builds not just knowledge, but wisdom. Third, mistakes are part of the process. The technique doesn't avoid confusion, it chases it. Every time you stumble in your explanation, you discover a weak point. That discovery is not a problem, it's progress. You're catching misunderstandings early. You're correcting before habits form. You're learning from the inside out. Beyond learning, the Feynman technique is also a tool of persuasion. If you're trying to sell an idea, a product, or a solution, clarity is your ally. People are drawn to those who can speak simply, not because they lack depth, but because they've done the work to understand. In a noisy world, clarity stands out. It builds trust. It says, I know what I'm talking about, and I care enough to help you understand too. That's what made Richard Feynman legendary. He wasn't just a Nobel Prize-winning physicist. He was a storyteller, a translator of the abstract. He once said, if you can't explain something in simple terms, you don't understand it. That wasn't arrogance. It was a challenge to himself and to others to go deeper, not into complexity, but into clarity. So how can you start using this technique today? Start small. Pick one idea you've been trying to learn. It could be from your studies, your work, or even your personal life. Take a blank sheet. Write the concept at the top. Try explaining it from scratch, as if you're teaching a curious beginner. Don't worry about being perfect. Just speak, write, discover, and then circle the parts that feel muddy. That's where the real learning begins. Then go back, reread, research, ask questions, and once you find the missing pieces, come back and try again. Each round, the explanation gets cleaner, the knowledge gets deeper, the confidence grows. Eventually, you may find yourself using this technique without even thinking about it, explaining ideas out loud as you walk, teaching friends without trying to impress, writing things down not to show off, but to simplify. That's when you know it's become a mindset, a quiet habit of thought. And perhaps beyond all the benefits of improved memory, clearer thinking, and better learning, what you gain most from the Feynman technique is humility. You learn to say, I thought I understood, but I didn't. Let's figure it out. That kind of honesty is rare, but it's the foundation of true intelligence, the kind that's grounded, the kind that grows. So the next time you encounter a big idea, don't just highlight it. Don't just memorize it. Explain it. Out loud, on paper, to a friend, to a child, to yourself. Because when you can teach it simply, you don't just know it, you own it. Parkinson's Law. Sometimes it's not the task itself that's overwhelming. It's the time you've given it. A short email takes hours. A quick report drags into the evening. A 20-minute core stretches over half a day. And as you look back, you wonder, how did something so small take so long? The answer lies in a deceptively simple truth, known as Parkinson's Law. Work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Coined by British naval historian Cyril Northcote Parkinson in the 1950s, this idea started as a satirical observation, but has since been proven to hold deep psychological weight. At its core, Parkinson's Law says that if you give yourself too much time, your mind will stretch the task to fill that space. Procrastination creeps in. Perfectionism flares up. You start polishing, tweaking, overthinking. Not because the task requires it, but because the space allows it. And so, a 2-hour task becomes a 2-day ordeal. A simple decision becomes a week-long debate. You feel busy, but not productive. Active, but not effective. This isn't a time management problem. It's a time perception problem. The mind, when faced with too much unstructured time, fills it with unnecessary weight. But what if you turned this law on its head? What if, instead of letting work expand to fill your day, you compressed your day to fit your most important work? What if, instead of giving a task more time, you gave it just enough and no more? That's where Parkinson's Law becomes a tool for self-mastery. Let's say you need to clean your home. Normally, you'd give yourself the whole Saturday, but instead, you set a timer for 30 minutes. That's it. Suddenly, you don't waste time folding one towel perfectly or debating where every item should go. You prioritize. You move with focus. You clean the areas that matter most. And surprisingly, you often get more done in 30 minutes than you would have in a whole lazy afternoon. This principle applies across your entire life. Writing a report? Give yourself 1 hour instead of 3. Preparing a presentation? Build the outline in 20 minutes, not a day. Responding to emails? Batch them into a single 15-minute window instead of letting them interrupt you all morning. When you shrink the time, you shrink the room for distraction. You shrink the temptation to delay, to perfect, to overprocess. You tap into what many call constructive urgency, that burst of energy that appears just before a real deadline, that edge that forces clarity, that focus that silences the noise. This is why so many people report that they're most productive right before a deadline. The clock is ticking. The pressure is real. Decisions are made faster. Words are written without agonizing. And most importantly, the non-essential disappears. You don't have time to obsess over formatting or background details. You're too busy finishing. Parkinson's Law explains why this happens. But once you understand it, you don't need to wait for the pressure. You can create it yourself, artificially, intentionally, by setting shorter deadlines, by blocking off limited time windows, by telling yourself, this gets done by noon. No extensions. Suddenly time becomes an ally. Not something that stretches tasks, but something that shapes them. And the benefits go beyond productivity. When you constrain your time, you reclaim your leisure. If you give every task an open invitation to spill into your evening, you'll never have time to rest. But when you fence your tasks into tighter bounds, you create space. Space to breathe, to walk, to disconnect. That's the irony of Parkinson's Law. It doesn't just help you work better. It helps you live better. This principle pairs beautifully with another timeless idea, the 80/20 rule, also known as the Pareto principle. It states that 80% of results often come from 20% of efforts. So what happens when you apply this to your time? You start asking, what's the 20% of this task that creates 80% of the value? And then, How can I use Parkinson's law to do just that 20% within half the time? You stop writing lengthy emails that no one reads. You stop building presentations with 60 slides. You stop wasting hours on tweaks that add no meaning. Instead, you become precise, focused, essential. Let's bring this into a practical frame. Imagine you have a report due in a week. Under normal conditions, you'd spend the week thinking about it, collecting notes, dabbling, delaying. But with Parkinson's law, you give yourself one focused hour tomorrow to produce a full draft. The rest of the week can be used sparingly for review. You've flipped the script. You've chosen action over anxiety. The same goes for creative work. Artists, writers, and thinkers often speak of flow, a state where time fades and productivity peaks. Flow doesn't require long hours. It requires focused time. Parkinson's law helps create the conditions for flow by limiting the window. You tell yourself, I'm creating for 25 minutes, then I stop. No pressure to be perfect, just permission to be present. And here's the deeper magic. When you beat Parkinson's law, even once, you recalibrate your expectations. You realize that tasks don't need the time you thought they did. You begin to question the length of meetings, the size of to-do lists, the way you spend your days. You see that time, like work, is flexible. And if you don't shape it consciously, it will shape you by default. Of course, the goal isn't to rush or cut corners. It's to bring intention back to your schedule. You set limits not to pressure yourself, but to liberate yourself from the slow creep of waste. You become more discerning. You stop glorifying busy, and you start respecting your own attention. So how can you apply Parkinson's law starting today? Try this. Pick one task that usually drags. Cleaning, writing, email. Give yourself half the time you'd normally allow. Set a visible timer. Then go. Focus. Work with energy. And when the time's up, stop. Review what you accomplished. You might be surprised. You might even be a little proud. Because you didn't just do the task. You owned it. You can also batch similar tasks. Instead of spreading small errands across the day, group them into a 30-minute block. You give that block a hard start and stop. When time is short, your decisions become sharper, and what doesn't matter tends to fall away. You can also use Parkinson's law to balance structure with freedom. Schedule time for deep work and for deep rest. Put boundaries on both. Let your work have a beginning and an end. Let your leisure be guilt-free. When tasks no longer stretch endlessly, life begins to feel lighter. And as a bonus, combine this principle with self-reflection. At the end of each week, ask, where did work stretch unnecessarily? Where could a tighter deadline have helped? Over time, you'll develop a kind of time intuition, an internal sense of how long things should take, not how long they could take. That's when Parkinson's law stops being a theory and becomes a way of life. Because time is not just something we spend, it's something we shape. And when you shape it wisely, you find yourself with more of it than you ever imagined. Zeigarnik Effect. There's a subtle tension that lives in the mind. A quiet tug that pulls at your attention, even when you try to move on. A forgotten email. An unfinished errand. A task started but left incomplete. It lingers. It echoes. And the more you try to ignore it, the more persistent it becomes. This mental phenomenon, quietly working behind the scenes, is known as the Zeigarnik Effect, and once you understand it, you can use it to boost your focus, spark your motivation, and keep others hanging on your every word. The Zeigarnik Effect is named after Bluma Zeigarnik, a psychologist in 1920s Berlin, who made a simple but profound observation. Waiters in a local cafe had remarkable memories for orders that were still being prepared, but as soon as the meals were served, the details disappeared. The uncompleted tasks stayed vivid, fresh, urgent. The completed ones faded. As if the brain said, "That's done. Move on." Intrigued, she tested this further in her lab and confirmed it. People remember interrupted or incomplete tasks far more than completed ones. And so the principle was born. Unfinished business sticks in the brain. This has deep implications for how we learn, how we work, and how we pay attention. The mind, it turns out, doesn't like open loops. It wants closure, resolution, completion. When we leave something hanging, the brain keeps a mental thread attached to it, sometimes gently, sometimes urgently. That's why you keep thinking about the text you meant to reply to, or the project you half started last night. It's not forgetfulness, it's cognitive tension, an itch that hasn't been scratched. But here's the hidden beauty: you can use that tension. Let's say you're struggling with procrastination. You've been putting off a task for days. It feels heavy, intimidating, far away. But if you just sit down and begin, even for 5 minutes, you trigger the Zeigarnik Effect. You open a loop. And once that loop is open, your brain won't let it go so easily. You'll start thinking about it in the background. You'll feel a subtle urge to return. The task, once ignited, begins to pull you toward it. That's the magic of the just start for 5 minutes trick. You're not committing to finishing. You're committing to opening a loop. And in doing so, you let your mind start working with you instead of against you. The unfinished task becomes a quiet engine, a source of inner drive. It's no longer distant. It's alive. Writers know this well. They often end a writing session mid-paragraph, mid-sentence, even mid-thought. Why? Because it's easier to pick up where you left off than to start from nothing. An incomplete sentence invites completion. The Zeigarnik Effect fuels momentum. It tells your brain, there's still something here, come back. This effect is also a powerful tool in persuasion and storytelling. If you want to hold someone's attention, open a loop. Begin your presentation with a question. Pose a mystery. Start a story, but don't finish it right away. That gap, the space between the setup and the resolution, keeps the mind engaged. It creates a kind of emotional gravity, pulling listeners forward. Not because you're forcing them to pay attention, but because their brain needs to know what happens next. This is why cliffhangers work so well in television, why mystery novels are hard to put down, why good public speakers plant questions early and answer them later. The Zeigarnik Effect is doing the work. It holds the audience in a state of suspended curiosity, a productive discomfort that drives attention. But there's a rule here: you must eventually close the loop. The payoff matters. If you leave people hanging too long, or never resolve the story, the effect fades or turns into frustration. In learning, this principle has subtle power. If you want to remember something better, try interrupting your study session mid-concept. Leave something unfinished, or end your notes with a question you haven't answered yet. This incomplete state will nudge your brain to return to the material later. You can even plant open loops intentionally. I'm still not sure how this formula works. Let me revisit it tomorrow. That simple sentence keeps the thread alive in your memory. And in everyday life, you can use the Zeigarnik Effect to build habits. Start your day by opening small loops. Write a to-do list, but only begin the first task. Start a journal entry without finishing it. Read the introduction of a book, then put it down. These half-completions become silent drivers. They give your mind a purpose to return to. You're creating momentum, not by force, but by design. But there's a shadow side to this effect. Because not all open loops are helpful. Too many incomplete tasks can overwhelm the brain. That's why people often feel stressed, even if they haven't done much. Their mind is juggling mental tabs left open, quietly burning in the background. Emails unanswered, messages drafted but unsent, conversations unresolved. Each one holds a sliver of attention. Each one whispers, "Finish me." This is where clarity becomes crucial. The goal is not to open as many loops as possible. It's to close them with intention, or keep only the ones that serve you. That's why lists, schedules, and systems help. They take the open loops out of your head and into the world, where they can be managed. Externalizing tasks relieves internal tension. You're not forgetting. You're choosing when to complete them. The Zeigarnik Effect, then, becomes a tool when it's used consciously. When you intentionally start a task to let it grow in your mind. When you intentionally open a story loop to hold attention. When you intentionally interrupt yourself to build anticipation or memory. It's a form of psychological leverage, a way to let the brain's own tendencies work in your favor. And perhaps most importantly, this effect reminds us that completion brings peace. Every time you check something off, finish a thought, resolve a plan, you free mental space. You release the cognitive tension. You make room for presence. That's why finishing small things often feels disproportionately satisfying. It's not just about productivity. It's about closure. So how can you apply this in your daily life? To beat procrastination, just begin. Open the task for a few minutes. Let the Zeigarnik Effect pull you forward from there. To improve focus, leave a task slightly unfinished on purpose. Give your brain something to come back to. To hold attention, start stories, questions, or ideas, but delay the resolution. Use open loops to guide engagement. To increase memory, interrupt study sessions or deliberately pause learning mid-concept. Your brain will keep chewing on it. To reduce stress, write down all the open loops in your head, then either complete, schedule, or release them. The mind is a story machine. It doesn't like loose ends, but you can shape that tendency, not just to feel anxious, but to stay engaged, to build momentum, to remember what matters, and to close with intention. And maybe that's the real lesson of the Zeigarnik Effect. Life is full of open loops. Some need to be closed. Some are better left gently open. And some, when used wisely, can quietly lead you to exactly where you need to go. Default to yes. Assumed consent. Much of life runs on subtle cues, quiet patterns, tiny nudges we don't always notice, but often follow. One of the most understated, yet powerful of these, is the way we're guided through defaults in conversation, not through pressure, not through persuasion in the traditional sense, but through the way a choice is presented, not as a question, but as an assumption. This technique is known as default to yes, or assumed consent, and when used ethically, it can help you guide decisions, reduce friction, and move through life with quiet confidence. Imagine this: someone asks, "Would you like to be added to our newsletter?" It's a clear question. It invites a choice. Now imagine a different version. "I'll go ahead and add you to our newsletter. You can unsubscribe anytime." Notice the difference. The first invites decision. The second assumes consent. And most people, unless they feel a strong objection, will simply go along with it. Why? Because the brain favors ease. Because saying no requires more effort than doing nothing. And because when something is presented as already decided, we often accept it. This is the psychological power of defaults. When an option is framed as the expected path, we tend to follow it. Not because we're manipulated, but because we're wired to avoid unnecessary decision-making. Every day we make hundreds of tiny choices, and each one takes a little energy. So when one feels preset, predetermined, or already underway, we often let it ride. We default to yes, and we do it more often than we think. In behavioral economics, this principle has been studied deeply. One famous example is organ donation policies. In countries where people must opt into being a donor, participation rates are modest. But in countries where everyone is a donor by default and must opt out if they choose, participation skyrockets. The difference: framing. One makes you take action to join. The other makes you take action to leave. And most people, when not highly motivated either way, stay with what's already chosen. The default to yes technique takes that same insight and applies it to conversation. Instead of framing an idea as a proposal, you frame it as a plan. Instead of asking, "Do you want to meet next week?" you say, "So, we'll meet next week at 10 a.m. The default has been set. And unless someone objects, it usually goes unchallenged. Not because they've been forced, but because you've gently removed the need for decision-making. This works for several reasons. First, there's inertia, the human tendency to stay with the current course. unless there's a compelling reason to change. Second, there's social harmony. Most people are slightly uncomfortable pushing back, especially in low-stakes situations. Saying no feels awkward. It can invite tension. So if the plan seems reasonable, we go along. Third, there's commitment pressure. When something is framed as if it's already happening, people often feel a subtle urge to stay consistent with that idea. It feels easier. Smother. Done. But here's where it becomes a powerful tool of influence and leadership. When used ethically, default to yes helps people move forward. It removes friction. It takes away the burden of unnecessary choices. It helps teams act, plans unfold, and small decisions get made without endless back and forth. In this way, it's not manipulation, it's momentum. Imagine you're a team leader scheduling a meeting. If you send a message saying, "Should we meet next week?" you invite a flood of replies, delays, and indecision. But if you say, "We're set for next Thursday at 10 a.m., let me know if that doesn't work," you've made it easy. You've done the thinking. And unless someone has a conflict, the plan moves forward without resistance. The default is motion. This technique is also used in sales and service. A subtle example, instead of asking, "Would you like fries with that?" the phrasing becomes, "Fries come with that, okay with you?" The assumption is yes, and the response, more often than not, is yes. Because saying yes feels natural. Saying no feels like a deviation. In digital design, this technique appears as pre-checked boxes on forms. A free trial that starts automatically. A subscription that renews unless cancelled. These defaults are powerful because they rely on the same human tendency to accept what's already set. Again, this is where ethics matter. A default should never trap someone. It should never deceive. It should always be easy to opt out. The power of this tool lies in how gently it moves people, not how subtly it corners them. So how can you apply default to yes in your own life without being manipulative? Start with good intentions. Use it when the path you're suggesting is reasonable, beneficial, or aligned with what the other person likely wants. You're not removing choice, you're just presenting it differently. Instead of asking, "Would you like a follow-up call?" say, "I'll follow up next week. Feel free to let me know if anything changes before then." Instead of, "Do you want to meet again to review this?" say, "Let's plan to review it together next Tuesday." Instead of, "Would you like help with that?" say, "I'll go ahead and send you a few ideas. Take what's useful." Each time, you're lightly guiding the outcome, while still leaving room for a graceful no. You can also use this with yourself. Set defaults for your habits. Don't ask, "Should I work out today?" Decide, "I work out at 6 p.m. unless I have a real reason not to." Make the healthy choice the default. Make reading the default. Make kindness the default. Don't wait for motivation. Let the decision be made once, then simply follow it. And in relationships, use this technique to create ease and rhythm. "I'll bring the snacks unless you've got something planned. We'll stick to Friday dinners, unless you need a break." These statements feel natural. They offer comfort. They remove decision fatigue. And because the default is framed with care, it rarely feels pushy. Of course, as with any influence strategy, awareness matters. Be conscious of when someone else is using this on you. Notice when something is presented as normal, automatic, or already arranged. You always have the right to pause, ask questions, and reset the default. Just because a course is presented as the path doesn't mean it's the right one. The real power of default to yes lies in understanding and choosing what should be defaulted and what shouldn't. Ultimately, this technique is a reminder that how we frame a choice matters as much as the choice itself. The brain is drawn to ease, to clarity, to decisions that feel pre-made, thought out, stable. When you present something as the expected plan, it often becomes the chosen one. Not because people are passive, but because you've removed the fog. So whether you're leading a team, writing an email, offering help, or shaping your own day, consider the default. Set it thoughtfully. Offer it gently. And watch how often people say yes, not because they were persuaded, but because the path was already clear.